Okay. And here we are live once again. Hopefully the internet is good. Okay. So to start off, we'll bring up some comments. I also have my snack that I am eating. I lost track of time, so. Well, let's see here. We had some interesting questions recently. So Liang Shu recently asked about where the stress is in the word mistake, and I directed him on how to maybe figure that out. And I think that's a good point, that when you guys are trying to hear the word stress, you want to try to put the stress on different syllables and see how it sounds. And you might not be able to tell, right? So if you say mistake or mistake, you might not have any idea, like, well, okay, I don't know. So then you can go to forvo.com, for example, find audio recordings of words by native speakers and really try to listen to that particular word and try to hear where is the stress. And that's a good way to help develop your ears for word stress. A whole lot better than a bunch of rules that don't actually help your ears. We also had a comment recently saying difficulty between cut or cup, cop, and cap. So ah, and ah, which is a common problem. So if Eddie Cuevas is in the live stream today, we can maybe discuss that. But we have some other things from some other people that I'm going to be discussing once they are here. Hello, Rodrigo. How are you? Don't mind me, I'm just eating. I lost track of time because I was editing a video. So here we are. But that's okay. It can be a mukbang or however you pronounce that. We're going Korean style. I'm good. Try not to talk with my mouth full. You have any questions? If not, that's fine. I'm just kind of trying to find things in the comments. As I was saying, there's a couple people that are going to be hopping into the chat today, hopefully. And we're going to be talking about some specific issues they've been having. Okay, you do have questions. Good. So let's hear it, or hear them. It's like the most boring start to a live stream ever. Just learn how an American English teacher eats. But yeah, here we have toast with peanut butter, date syrup, turmeric, pepper, and garlic powder, which any reasonable human being would say, why are you eating that? And I say, because it's delicious. So Rodrigo says that He was listening to the radio, and he heard a slight W sound between another and identity. And then looking at examples where there was a pause between them, there was no W sound. Have you heard something like that? Another identity, another identity. That's extremely strange. Extremely strange. What could have happened there, especially since we have an R in the equation in the mix here. Sometimes, so there's a connection between R and W in the mind of a native English speaker, and um, like the R sound is a hard sound to get even for native speaking children. It's one of the last sounds that seems to develop. And so in place of that, before we can make the R, we replace it with a W, right? So instead of saying right, we'll say white, or instead of saying brother, we'll say brother, right? And the at the end, like the end of a vowel sound like another, would be like another. It wouldn't be like another or something like that. Although some children do kind of speak that way, like another, another, something kind of like that. But um, what could have happened, because sometimes when we're speaking, if there's an R or a W sound, occasionally wires get crossed on the brain. Um, and it's not that like we mix up the sounds necessarily, it's just that occasionally it's like we're going to say an R and the W kind of comes out, or vice versa, especially if there's like lots of W's and R's in the same, phrase. Um, and we can really get tongue tied very, very easily with a sentence like that. So here, I think what might have happened is it's just perhaps the person um, got a little crossed, their wires got crossed in their brain, and a little bit of a W started to form, and then they stopped it as they continued the flow. I think that's probably what happened. It could also be a dialectical thing. If they were an American English speaker, maybe there's um, a certain area. I can't imagine it in American speech, but perhaps in British speech, that could be something that might happen. I don't know. So it's definitely not something that should be there for sure. That's very strange. Um, okay. Steve, welcome to the chat. You probably have ever. You mean ever, never? Ever doesn't really work here. If it's negative, you probably have never talked about this before. If it's positive, you probably have already talked about this before. But is it informal to pronounce the TH sometimes as a flap D? Yeah, so we did talk about that. The TH is not a flap D. It's never a flap D. Never, 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 never. Without, that, those are some good. No, like even informally, it's not a thing. I would be extremely shocked if I heard somebody doing that. Maybe when it's in the middle of a word, like without that. But I think that would be a variation on, like we were talking before, with like the hip hop rapper type accent, where they use regular D's to replace the TH, and that is very informal and does not sound educated to the average American ear. So perhaps when the TH is in the middle, because they would say like without, it can, because now it's between two vowels, and since they're using a normal D, even though that's very informal, that does trigger the flap, even though they're using the D incorrectly, right? It's not supposed to be a D sound there. That's the only time I can think that maybe it could be a flap, but again, that is based on the hip hop rapper, type accent or dialect that is not standard, and definitely does not sound neutral. But yeah, under normal circumstances, is never ever possible to make a th with a flap d. It's not possible. It's not part of English or American English, at least standard American English, I guess I should say. So also an important point there. So you gave the example of like that or those. The flapped D never starts a word. Like we never start from that position. It's extremely hard for me to isolate because I need a drink. I swallowed that wrong. Because we never use it in isolation, like as an individual sound. So, if like say for example, if we have do that's unstressed, it's just a helping verb, like I don't know, what do you want? Then that do at the start of do, because there's something before it, you can drop the T on what, and then have that vowel plus the oo, or again if you reduce do. And then that D, that special case, because it's not stressed and it's just a very common helping verb, you can flap that D, even though it's at the start of a word technically. There are rare cases like that, but for actual words like the th sound, obviously, as I said, the th sound will not be a flap D, but theoretically, let's say that the th sound could be a D sound, like it is in the sort of hip hop rapper type speech, um, where they say dat and doze, it would never be a flap because it's so strange and difficult for a native speaker to start from that position. So if I say like, "Oh, that's cool," right? I could say "that's cool" if I use this like really informal sounding hip hop speech. "Oh, that's cool, yo," whatever. But um, if you try to flap it and you say that's cool," like that's not even English. It doesn't sound like English at all. So I went to English and typed another combination, another interest, and I think the first result that popped up sounded like that too. Interesting. Okay, let's see. Okay, so I think English always goes in the same order because I was playing with it before, and it seemed like it showed the same videos in the same order every time. So I typed in another interest, and it's giving me what looks like it's from PBS Hawaii, Kitty La Gareda, Long Story Short with Leslie Wilcox. Is that the video that it's showing you? It says career in public relations. She pursued another interest. Blah 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 blah. My search was in American English. Oh, that might help. This is American English. The result, yeah, it's the same result. So is that the one that popped up for you? Just so I know that we're on the same one. Too bad I can't share my screen here. So it says PBS Hawaii and the little circle in the top. If you pause it, PBS Hawaii. The full sentence is. See if I can copy this. Yeah, I can. Gives this as the example. She pursued another interest, one that pushed the limits of risk taking. Once you confirm that, I can give you an answer on if there's a W there, because it should be the same one. But okay. Let's see if I can hear it in here. So I'm not getting any confirmation, so I can't say. But in the one I'm listening to, there's definitely no W there. This is a mess. Too much peanut butter. Okay. Well, as I said, if there's ever a W between and another vowel at the start of the next word, it's not supposed to be there. And it's very strange for it to be there. Maybe it's a regional thing. I don't know. But it's definitely not normal, regardless. So, okay. Any other questions while we're here? We're still waiting on see Meadow, and somebody else had a question. It goes in the comments. Yeah, that's right. For Eddie Cuevas, if he shows up today, we can talk a bit about and because he's having some trouble with that. Let's see, what else do we have? Yeah. Okay, Steve, I know this can happen in music, but did he pronounce fire as like fi? Wait, what? Timestamp 20. Okay. Second blood. Timestamp 20 seconds. I assume it's the official music video. Let's see. It's going to be loud. Okay. Let me turn on subtitles. Subtitles. Are there subtitles? I don't see subtitles. Yeah, because I can't even tell if he's saying fire or like fighter or something like that. I can't tell from the context, and I'm probably going to need subtitles to understand what he's actually saying there. Yeah, but it sounds like he's saying fight, like fight, like it's the I diphthong, but he's cutting off the end of the diphthong. And if it's supposed to be fire, he's definitely not saying the R. He's saying just like the very first half of the word. Okay, so I guess he's saying fire. I don't know. I can't tell. See, and that's another good thing because if you, again, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not judging it. Like people talk how they talk, and that's perfectly fine. But if you're learning English, you want to, especially if you want to sound more neutral, or if you at least just want to be clearly understood. If you talk like, say, this guy does in the video, some people aren't really even going to be able to understand you because sometimes when people speak like that, it's to like the average speaker, they're changing so many things and dropping so many sounds that we don't really know what they're saying. sometimes, not all the time. So it's almost like it's becoming like its own dialect in a way that's not even completely mutually intelligible, which means, like, for example, British English and American English, like standard British and standard American, are mutually intelligible. Like, we can talk to each other, we can understand each other just fine. Where, say, Scottish maybe has like so many different sound changes that sometimes we can't really understand them, and it starts to become not understandable anymore. Um, so so messy. I put way too much syrup on this one. Oh yeah, so Kitty Largareta's video is the first one here. Yeah, so that's the one that I was looking at. I'm listening to this again. Saying forward, forward, forward. Yeah, I'm not hearing any W at all, like not even a small little one. Let me turn it up, really try to listen here. Yeah, there's absolutely no W there at all. What you might be hearing is, because the sound, you don't need to use the lips for the R. I could just say that's fine. But we very commonly and naturally do sort of bring the lips up and out a little bit. Er, er, er. And what you might be hearing is an illusion where, for some reason, your ears are sort of maybe picking up that lip position, and you're sort of hearing it as a small W, but my brain is not interpreting that as a W. Like, I hear zero, not even a tiny, tiny little bit of a W. There's no W there whatsoever. And I can verify that for certain. So I don't know. I don't know. I think your ears might be playing tricks on you. Another interest, another interest, another interest. Yeah, there's no W there. Another interest. Yeah, there's no W there. Another interest, another interest. Yeah, it has to be the lips of the are, because when I listen to it with keeping that in mind, I can start to hear kind of what might start to sound like a W, but I wouldn't identify it as a W. It's definitely not a W sound in English. So yeah, I think that's why. But I'm almost done with my food. Almost. Any other questions? Sorry, I didn't want to talk with my mouth full. Hello. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Facu Inglés. I imagine you're likely a Spanish speaker, possibly Portuguese, but I'm pretty sure Portuguese has a little hat over the E for Inglés. But yes, welcome to the chat. Let me know if you have any questions, or if you just want to hang out. Steve, can the diphthong ow turn into what? Uh-huh. I guess I heard that in some songs. I'm not sure though. Uh, if it's rap or hip hop, possibly. I can't say. I don't really listen to a lot of rap and hip hop, so off the top of my head, no. That sounds like a very, very strange thing to happen. If you can give me, yeah, uh-huh, uh-huh. So like, I don't know, cow, like it doesn't make any sense. If you have some specific examples, again, video with timestamps or whatever. But if it's from this sort of hip hop rap type thing, like that's really a whole different world. Like as I mentioned before, you can use whatever references you want. You can learn to speak however way you want. Um, but I'm not really in that world. I don't know about all the little changes that those speakers make, and I can go in and listen and see, okay, yeah, they're saying that in that case. But as far as standard normal English, that the average, person speaks around the country, I don't think so, unless you can give me some examples that I can maybe analyze that aren't in the hip hop rap um, type of thing. Is in rap, so I'll try to find. Okay, good. So yeah, let me know about that. Blah, 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 blah. You're welcome, Rodrigo. Argentino. Very nice. Okay, yeah. So I speak Spanish, so it makes sense. I was trying to pronounce it in a Spanish way because I saw the accent on the e. So inglés, inglés, Paco inglés. Um, y eres argentino. Muy bien. I haven't been to Argentina yet. I want to go someday. But the Argentinian accent is my favorite accent. Well, one of my favorite accents. My actual favorite accent is a Brazilian Portuguese accent in Spanish. I know it's strange, but in Portuguese it would be, yeah, that's what I thought. You have the little the hat over it. So there are so many accents, it's hard to choose one. Yeah, I know. When I started learning Spanish, way back, like what was that, 2014, I think. Well, I started learning it before that, but when I really sat down and started to finally teach myself and figure out how to learn a language, um, I was focusing on the Mexican accent because I'm from San Diego. At the time, I was living in Arizona, which is right next to Mexico anyway. So that to me just seemed sort of like a neutral, accent. I didn't really know much about other accents. And then, of course, as I explored, I learned more about the different one, like Venezuelan accent, Argentinian accent, Spain accent. Um, and I used to hate the Spanish, like the Castilian, um, but it grew on me, and now it's one of my favorites. Corazón. Ay, no, mi corazón. Anyway, but of course, in Argentina, you guys use what is actually a very old grammatical structure that most Spanish speakers today don't use, which is vos. Um, and now instead of being used formally, like if I remember correctly, I think it was used as a formal way to say you in under in the time of Queen Isabel. Because I watched they tried to use some of like the historical language, and I watched Isabel, Spanish like history documentary type thing as a drama. A super super good show, but they use both a lot. And Argentina now uses it instead of tú, right? So it's informal now. But um, yeah, and you say like playa. Yeah, quiero ir a la playa. It's really interesting sounding. I like it. I have no idea about Spanish grammar. Yeah, well, that would make sense. I assume you're a native speaker, so um, you probably wouldn't. Just like most natives don't tend to know much about the grammar of their own language, they just speak it. Didn't know. Yeah, common mistake. So didn't, right? The did is already in the past, so you're not going to change no to new, right? That's probably a typo, but it's a common mistake. We only make usually one change to the verb, so very nice. But anyway, my chair all the way down it is. So what else? Any other questions? We're still waiting on Steve to find that example. I don't know if you gave up or if you're still looking for it. We're also still waiting on Meadow to show up. I assume he'll probably be here maybe in an hour or so. I think he gets here a little bit later. But close that, close that. I'm also going to be doing, I put out a poll recently. I don't know who here saw that poll. It was actually like a week ago. Asking, well, I was seeing how interested people would be for a lesson talking about how there actually isn't a neutral American English accent, and how you can sound more neutral more easily, but still, or how you can sound more neutral more easily, but still sound natural, to where most Americans won't even be able to tell, because that's the truth. That's the reality. And I'm going to be putting together a whole video about that and showing my evidence sources for why I say that. And actually, one interesting thing I just found out last week, I teach you guys the cot-cot merger, and it turns out that the cot-cot merger is actually moving eastward. So people under 40 who live in the Midwest are now naturally using the cot-cot merger instead of the ah and aw sounds. So that's just one more reason for you guys to learn the way I'm teaching you with the cot-cot merger, because it's the way that now the majority of Americans are going to probably be using that particular sound. So, but anyway, so Faku, I have a few doubts about the T sound after an or an unvoiced sound. Okay, can you help me with it? Help me with it. I can, yes. Do you have any specific examples that you can throw out? If not, I can try to think of some. But um, Rodrigo, I didn't get notified of that poll. Yeah, YouTube kind of just like shows the poll to some people, and if there's engagement on it, they might show it out to more, just like the videos. So unfortunately, it doesn't show it to all the people following me, I guess, which is really stupid. I hate that the YouTube algorithm works that way. Um, but yeah, I got, I think, 30 votes on it so far. And so far, the 32 votes, and the options are very interested, interested, maybe, or not interested. And 91% say very interested, with the remaining 9% saying interested. So this is definitely a lesson that I'm going to make for you guys. And it's actually going to be a very core part of my channel moving forward. Not necessarily something I'm going to be talking about directly, but it's going to be, it's already kind of been always in the background, but now I'll have a video to point to so that people can watch to learn more. I also recently asked about what American English pronunciation, or what area of American English pronunciation do you have the most trouble with? Got some votes on that, and then asking people if they follow me elsewhere on other platforms. So I hate that too. We lose a lot of good stuff because of that. Yeah, we miss. Yes, very good. Yes, miss. Miss would be a much better word here instead of lose. That's in both Spanish and Portuguese. That's a common mistranslation. Yeah, depends on the context, right? Anyway, so faku, I haven't got any specific examples from you, so I'll go ahead and try to think of some here. A few doubts. We should probably say this is also a common Spanish problem. It's much more common in English to use question instead of doubt. Doubt is usually something very specific, like you don't believe something, so you have doubts about the truth of that thing. And we tend to use question. So I know in Spanish you would say like tengo una deuda sobre lo que sea. Um, but in like me speaking as an English speaker, it's much more natural for me to want to say in Spanish, tengo una pregunta, which I know obviously there are times when you would use that, but I would almost always use that because I'm an English speaker, where in Spanish you want to use doubt a lot instead of question, but you need to switch it. We use question much, much more. Um, Does it sound always the same after SHFS, for example, list left text record? Okay, good question. Good question. I kind of know the direction we're going in here. So, uh, so this is the T sound after an unvoiced consonant. It's not always going to be just because it's a voiceless consonant, like it's not always going to do the same thing necessarily, but unvoiced, voiceless, same thing. But let's take a look at this. So with the S, okay, ST, this is an easy rule, which is actually part of a larger thing that you're kind of pointing to here. But ST is a super, super common combination. And the sort of rule that I tell you guys sometimes is when you have ST at the end of a word, um, the T will usually disappear, right? And that's because of what's going on here, right? It's kind of normally we would want to stop the T at the end of a word, and it's actually a little harder to try to stop the T after the S. And so we tend to just drop it. It just disappears. It's not a stop. It's not anything. It's just gone, right? So it'll sound like lis, right? IH is the second vowel on the vowel chart. Lis, lis. So I have to make a lis. Um, Now it's possible that we might go up into the T and do a little held T where we just kind of end in that position and there's no actual like cut off or anything. And so technically it's there, but it doesn't just sound like s, right? Uh, if there's a connection, like if I say list it, right? List it. Then that T, which it wants to become a D when it connects in American English, it will probably connect. Hello, Meadow. Um, I've been waiting for you. So, but if you say like, I have to list it, I have to list it. Sometimes it might sound kind of weird, but we will often kind of do that. Well, we can alternatively connect the S instead. So like make a listen, check it twice. Make a listen, check it twice instead of make a listen or list stand, right? Um, yeah. So usually when you hear it as a soft D, it's because the T wants to when the T connects to a vowel, it's supposed to be a flap D in American English, but it's kind of hard to flap with the S right there. And so we'll kind of just close it into like a soft D. We're like try to flap it, but it's really just like a really soft D that gets moved over. List it. So the flap doesn't actually happen, but the reason it's a D is because it's supposed to be a flap D in American English. But anyway, so depending on exactly, there's more than one thing that can happen here. This is one thing I try to tell you guys a lot, that there's not always just like, oh, in this case, it's always going to be this. It depends, right? Normally, if it's a T that connects to a vowel, it'll be a flap D. Oh, now there's an S in front of it. So either maybe the D will disappear and the S might connect, or you'll end up getting sort of a really weak D that connects instead. So this is again, the dynamic range and flow of American English pronunciation, real speech, right? With left, again, it's very, very common that we're going to drop the T after the F. I don't think it's as common as with the S. I notice the S one like all the time, but like if I say I left it at home, left it, or I left it at home, I left it at home. Now, if you're speaking a little more slowly, a little more clearly, you can't do that. You can't drop the T. Like if I say, oh, I left it at home, I left it at home. Now it's starting to sound kind of uneducated, kind of blah. Like it doesn't sound quite normal, quite right. So speed is always a factor here. Same thing with the ST. If you say, well, I don't know, list everything, right? Make sure you list everything. List everything. If I'm speaking slowly, I can't drop the T. I can't say make sure you list everything. Lists everything. It's not going to work. Okay, so the speed is also a factor of when you can maybe drop certain sounds or what's going to happen. X XS XS the KS sound, which is usually written with an X. It's x. That's going to work that's going to work pretty much the same as S plus T, except we might get something else that happens. But text. I can completely drop the T. I'm going to send you a text message. There's no T there. I can say the T, or I can put a little stop T there, text message. It's fine, but we'll commonly just drop the T. And then kept, I kept it. Again, if you're speaking really slowly, I kept it. It's going to be weird, but if you're speaking a nice, good speed, oh yeah, I kept it. It's possible. But the T can perfectly normally connect there. I kept it. Between P and T, it's a little bit different because with S and F, well, especially with the S or the KS, because of the proximity of the S to the T, it makes things just a lot easier to kind of drop it. Where with the F, it's probably a bit more common to keep the T. With the PT, it's definitely going to be more common to keep the T because it's pt, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean you have to keep the T. It's variable. It can be kind of a difficult point, actually. I see Steve retracted a message. That's okay. So T at the end of a word is generally, I mean, by default, it's supposed to be like a stop, whether that's a held stop or a glottal stop. And so T is at the end of a word is sort of like a really, really weak thing, and it can very easily disappear. Very, very easily disappear, even if there's not a voiceless consonant before it. If I say, I don't know, but that is better, right? But that, I can completely drop that T. That's no problem. I can even say, but that looks better. But that looks. Drop both the T's, but and that. But that looks. If there's a vowel, we're probably going to connect it instead, like but if or that is, right? But if there's no vowel, we're actually in these common grammar words that end with T, we very commonly in faster speech just drop the T completely. So it's a very weak sound, very, very weak sound. Anyway, okay, I see Steve deleted it because it's the wrong video. That's fine. Okay, Meadow. I just got in. Josh is speaking about Spanish more than English. Yeah, I think a Spanish teaching channel may be one of your channels, besides the English teaching one and the physical mechanics one. Yeah, I'm probably not gonna open or start a Spanish teaching channel. If I talk at all about other languages, which I probably will, because I'm going to get back into language learning in the future, that'll just be on my other channel. Unless I end up talking so much about language learning and it becomes its own channel, then maybe, but probably not. Okay. I have heard it like a yeah, okay, we did that. So, Steve, it's not the best example, but a video that I think the guy is pronouncing O as ah, Soka Aaron featuring iFlux. The short video. Do you have a timestamp for that? He said it's a short video, so I guess it doesn't matter. But Hisoka, let's see here, YouTube, yeah, Hisoka, Aaron. I should copy and paste it. I don't know why I'm typing it. I have that ability. Ouch. Um, Featuring iFlux. Okay. And what am I listening for again? Um, oh yeah, the owl. Yeah, got it. Got it. Let's see. So yeah, I'm hearing him say like down, but he's saying it like down, down, kind of. Yeah, down, down. Bounce, bounce, bounce. Now. Yeah, so a lot of his ows, they're not a smooth transition like ow. He's sort of how do I want to explain that? He's not breaking the diphthong, but he's sort of pulling the diphthong apart a little bit. So the way that you're describing it, like which I mean maybe or or something like I'm not exactly sure you if that's matching the way that you're trying to type it. Um, but that wouldn't be quite right. Uh, this is a natural thing that we can do, especially in music, where we sort of maybe stretch a word out a little bit or say it particularly forcefully, but it's really hard to describe. Um, but I could even say like, "Oh, you're going down," instead of "you're going down." Like I'm gonna, fight you, or we're playing a video game. I'm gonna win, right? That's what I'm saying. Like, "Oh, you're definitely gonna lose. You're going down," right? So I can sort of stretch it out and make it sound a little bit different, but it's still following the same basic path of the diphthong. Um, and the way that this person is speaking is nothing special. It's not the way that the sounds normally that the ow sound normally comes out. He's intentionally sort of manipulating the sound for a special effect. And I hear a lot of ows in there, right? So he's like, dun, 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 or like ow, dun, 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 ow, dun, 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 ow. And he's using a lot of ow words like bounce down, et cetera, et cetera. So it makes sense because that's where the rhythm, or not the rhythm, the rhyme and the sort of like the beats on that, right? So it's dun, 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 ow, dun, 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 ow. And so he's playing with it, extending it. Um, Faku, and what if you say st at the beginning of a word? That is a different situation. That is a completely different situation. This st, like or start, or step, whatever. Um, that t cannot be dropped at all. The part of the reason why the t can be dropped in the other case is because it's at the end of the word, or stoner, yeah. um, and what's going to happen here is apparently some teachers teach this as like the T becomes a D, which it doesn't become a D. What happens is and it's not just the S that does this. You can put other voiceless consonants before the T at the start of a word, and it'll do something similar. Or the S and the K, for example, will do something similar. But it's because the S has a dampening effect. So dampen meaning like to lower or to make less clear or to make lower in a way. So instead of like t, normally it would be tart, tep, tart, tep, and that's a nice strong T sound, right? But when you put the S in front of it, it sort of pushes that T sound kind of, I guess, flatter in a way. St. So it's not a D, it's not star, right? Start, step. It's start, step. So there's still a little bit of that sound. It's just you don't hear the actual you don't hear that crispness because the S is in front of it. But it sounds very similar to a D sound. But that T, again, you cannot drop it at all. That T has to be there. Does it sound more like a hard T than a soft D? It actually ends up sounding kind of like a soft T, really. Like except it doesn't have the crispness, right? Where D, because that also doesn't have the crispness of right? That sound there, right? That air that comes out. The D, because it's voiced, we don't hear the air there. And so when you have the S and the T, the S sort of hides a bit of that sound. And so it can kind of sort of sound like, oh, well, maybe now it's a D, right? Because we're going start, 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 but it's start. Now you don't want to say start. Okay, that's going to be way too much. It needs to dampen the T. Okay, start, start, not start. It's not a D. It's a very small difference. In fact, in reality, you could probably say ST as S with a weak D, and it'll probably sound perfectly fine. Maybe it'll sound a little bit off because in my mouth it's not actually a D, but they do sound extremely similar even to my ears. So, that might be a little thing. If you're kind of lazy about it, maybe you could do that. It's okay, whatever. But it is supposed to be a T. Text and facts are the same here. Yeah, text and facts. Text and facts. Now, again, this actually is rooted in the three consonant rule. It's not so much because it's ST or KT, like a voiceless sound plus a T, because obviously there's the other S there. But the three consonant rule is the middle. If there's three consonant sounds in a row, the middle one will usually disappear because unless we're clearly enunciating, it's too difficult to say texts or facts, right? We don't do that. We drop the T. We say texts, facts. No big deal. No problem, Faku. Rodrigo, another thing I heard the other day, the person said minute or less, reducing the word minute to pretty much min, and after that said minute lesson and didn't reduce that word. Is that a thing? Because the sound that comes after the word minute. Oh, because of the thing that, yeah, okay, I missed a word. Because of the sound that comes after the word minute. Or do you think that was just a random reduction? Minute or less, minute or less, minute less, minute less, minute or less. So probably what you're hearing. So if I say minute or less really fast, what's going to happen? So the stress is on the min, so that's going to be very clearly heard. The second syllable is already by default going to be or You can say either way, it doesn't matter. And then the T, right, the E is silent at the end. The T, because we have or, which is likely going to reduce to either way, it doesn't matter. The T is going to flap and connect over to or. And so you get minuter, minuter, minuter. So really, really quickly, you hear like one syllable, and then maybe you can hear two small syllables, or maybe your ears just hear like one syllable, maybe. So it's kind of like you hear the but you're not hearing like the iter, iter, right? Minute, minute or less, and a minute or less, minute or less. So that min really stands out, but I think maybe it could be maybe they didn't say it that way and they did say more like min. I find that um, strange if they sort of like dropped that second syllable. Um, Most likely your ears just couldn't keep up with all the syllables that were there. Um, that I think is the most likely explanation. Then when we say minute lesson, obviously the T isn't connecting to anything. Um, minute lesson, minute lesson, right? And so you actually hear both syllables a little more clearly there. Um, if I pronounce it at the same place where you place the tongue to say a D, is it too much? Well, the T and the D are pronounced in the same place. Um, in English, they're both up here. It's exactly the same position. Um, the only difference between the T and the D is that the T is voiceless and the D is voiced. So if I go up here and I say t, d, t, d, that's all it is. Or t, d, t, d. So, um, let's see, Eddie. Hello, the comma. I'm glad you're here, Eddie. If you want, we can talk about the I was wondering if you were going to show up. I also have to address one of Meadow's concerns. So make sure I don't forget that, Meadow. But let's see. Where was I? Yeah, so the comma. Does it affect connected speech? Yes and no. Yes and no. Depending on context, depending on lots of details and the general intonation, like is the person happy, sad, whatever. There's many things that can happen, but just standard default, what happens most of the time. All right, if I say I don't know, like what was that example that I gave in that lesson recently? Before she goes, give her this, right? Before she goes, give her this. Um, so we have a comma here, right? We have two clauses. So saying before she goes, give her this, or give her this before she goes. See, if I switch it, there's no comma because the normal word order here or the normal clause order would be give her this before she leaves. That's just the whole statement. Give her this before she leaves. There's no comma there. But what English can do is we can, not all the time, but we can very often rearrange clauses. And you can't just rearrange whatever you want. Okay, so there's certain guidelines for that, but we can rearrange certain clauses and put a comma to show that we broke that original order. The same thing like because. If I say I don't want to go because it's scary, or because it's scary, I don't want to go. The second one has a comma. Because it's scary, comma, I don't want to go. Either way, what we can do here, the comma, like the most basic default use of the comma is to create a pause, right? So you're asking, does it affect connected speech? Well, if there's a pause, then yeah, but we don't necessarily have to actually pause. That's why it's a little complicated. So if I say, before she goes, give her this. So goes and give wouldn't really connect anyway. But there's going to be a stop in the sound, right? If I'm speaking really clearly, or maybe I'm giving a speech, I say before she goes, give her this. That's a perfectly fine way to say it. It sounds very clear, very direct, like very urgent. Like, hey, I need you to listen to what I'm saying. So I'm going to say this nice and clearly. Before she goes, give her this. Okay, it's very important. And so you can use that rhythm, or if I'm speaking a bit faster, you don't have to actually stop the flow of the sound, but you do have to keep the same relative rhythm that the comma creates, right? If there were no comma and I say, before she goes, give her this. Before she goes, give her this. But the comma makes us go up. Before she goes, give her this. And there's slight different ways that you can do the intonation rising on the comma, but it rises. So you're not supposed to just go down, right? If I am speaking quickly, we need to know the comma is there. So if I don't pause the sound, I need to keep that rising tone, right? Before she goes, give her this. Before she goes, give her this. A couple different ways you can do it, but before she goes, give her this. Goes, give. Goes, give. So you don't actually have to, like if there were a connection, let's say before she goes, let's see, what does Z connect to? Ask her that. Okay. So now the Z and goes can connect over to the vowel a, right? Um, before she goes, ask her, right? Ask her that. Before she goes, ask her that. And it's going to sound like the Z sort of breaks through the comma, but we need that same tone, right? Before she goes, ask her that. Ask her that. Before she goes, ask her that. So it's an important thing to be aware of. It's a more minor point. There are much bigger things to worry about in English pronunciation and rhythm. But that is definitely, especially if you know a lot of that stuff and you already sound really well with a lot of the other details, that is something that you definitely need to pay attention to. And again, it's dynamic. It's very dynamic. English pronunciation is very, very dynamic. So, Faku, last question. Oh, I guess that was the last question. Okay, good. And you say you were having nightmares about the ST cluster. Yeah, I imagine. No need to overthink it. Meadow says about the flap T. You said, yeah, exactly. We have the flap T problem here. You said that the trick is to make the sound clear enough without being so firm that it sounds like a normal solid weak D. And there are a couple ways to do this. Could you please end of comment? That's okay. Yeah. So one thing I will say, as I mentioned earlier, like if you say like list it, okay, that is a case because normally, again, the T, if it were to connect in American English to like a vowel sound, it becomes a flap D, right? Like it is, it is, it is. But because of the S, it makes it to where we can't really flap, and it does become sort of a weak D. So there are special cases where you might expect a flat D sound, but it actually does come out as a weak D sound. Those are very special cases. Okay, normally we're just talking about regular flat D, which comes out all the time in a lot of words. And Meadow also wrote the flap T. And one thing that I always want to make clear to you guys, we are talking about the T, but we're also talking about the D. Okay, because in American English, there's the T sound, t, there's the D sound, d, but when it's the flap, there's only one sound. There is no flap T, okay? You can call it a flap T if it's spelled with the letter T, but I think that's confusing and misleading. So if it's, say, middle, which is spelled with a D, or better, well, actually, let me keep the same thing. Battle, okay? Middle, battle. That the one spelled with a D, one spelled with a T in American English, it's the same exact sound. It's a flapped D. Okay, flapped D. I just want to make that very, very clear to everybody because I hate that it's taught as a flapped T just because it's spelled with a T because there's no difference in sound. So that's one point to keep in mind. But so here when we're talking about the flap T or flap D, I only use the term flap D, but I'm referring to spellings with T and D. Okay, it does not matter. How do we make this sound? So yeah, I told Meadow the trick is to make the sound clear enough without being so firm. Now the sound by itself, like if I say like city was a word that Meadow sent to me. So city. So we have I and E, and we're gonna go itty. Well, not like that. Itty. Now, depending on what you have to go, like the next sound that you have to go to or the sound you're coming from, you might slightly adjust the way you flap it. Because here we're going from I to flap to E. We have to move forward. City. So I'm actually tapping my tongue forward like this. City. Where if you're going to like better, okay, you have to actually tap and pull back. So there's always going to be this sort of tapping motion. The placement is going to be generally the same, more or less, in this area here. But the idea is you're lightly tapping. We don't want a solid d sound, okay? So again, keeping those details in mind, how do you make it clear without making it so firm? Okay. City. See how can I describe this? City. Okay. Point number one, you do want to touch, right? You want to touch with the tongue like you would for a normal D, but you don't want to touch so firmly that it feels really like a strong connection. It should be maybe like you feel very lightly your tongue is touching. But in addition to that, a little secret trick that you can do, the D isn't just formed by the way that the tongue goes up on the top here, right? It's also because the sides of the tongue sort of close off the air. So when we bring it up, d, right, I have to push that sound out. Where for the flap D, the sides of your tongue should not come up to close that airway. Okay, the sides. Now you don't want to try to like push your sides down or anything because you're going to get a weird like I don't know. But you simply don't want to let the sides block the airway where the tip can touch the top very, very lightly. So if you touch the top lightly but don't close it, so if you were to hold it there very lightly, like so yeah, I'm able to still push sound out because the sides are a little loose and the sound can sort of flow around that. And so I'm just like, so you might want to practice trying to get your tongue there where it's like up on top, it's very lightly placed, but the sides are not blocking the airflow. And you can get used to how that position feels and then get used to just sort of getting in and out of that city. So the biggest difference really between the flap D and a normal weak D, aside from the fact that it taps and moves on, is that there's no solid closure of the airflow. If you're closing the airflow, you're going to make a D, a soft weak D, or a strong D if there's more air, more force. So that's all you have to do. Make sure that you're not closing that all the way. Now, depending on what we're doing, like if we're doing better and where we're tapping and pulling, that there's actually another trick for that specifically, which follows the same idea. It still has that same basic idea, but in addition to that, you actually don't have to touch the tip of your tongue. You can sort of touch the sides of the tip, which might seem weird, but instead of aha, okay, and it's at that part, okay, all right, where your mouth starts to go up like that. And if you're tapping and pulling into the R, you can do it sort of like where it's like better. So the tip of my tongue actually isn't touching, but the sides here are kind of touching that. Better, and then you do it quickly, and it's even though you're not touching because you're flicking it back. Better, that creates the flap sound. And that makes it a lot easier to go into the after the flap instead of trying to do a regular flap D and go into the Um, so again, depending on what's before and or especially what's after the flap D or T, um, we do have little adjustments that we might make to make it easier to transition. Um, but the basic idea is still the same, that you don't want to block the airflow, because as soon as you block the airflow, it's going to be more of a solid D, even if it's just a weak D. Okay. So I hope that makes sense. If not, feel free to ask questions or follow up or whatever other questions. It's fine. But Meadow in particular, I would like to hear if that makes sense to you, or if you have any related questions to that. But even though in Meadow, where I'm saying that the first name Meadow, 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 so I'm flapping it right there. Okay, Rodrigo, so true. I was listening to American speakers say the oh god, it's such a long word. Heterogeneity. I think heterogeneity. I think there's two ways to say that. But yeah, and I heard them say that in 3 different ways at least. Yeah, I can think of 2 off the top of my head. Oh yeah, the word. I didn't even see that the word was missing there. Yeah, the word. Yeah, and that's kind of like that's a mouthful of a word, and it's kind of long. And so sometimes what happens when there's like we have the flap, we have an R, we have like another flap at the end. And then there's like the EI spelling. Sometimes that's pronounced like E, sometimes it's pronounced I, sometimes it's kind of weird. And so some long words like that will actually have more than one pronunciation, just because like even for natives, it's such a relatively uncommon word. Like heterogeneous is a more common word. It's still uncommon. It's not a common word, but the heterogeneity or whatever, that's like a even less common word. So the longer it is and the less common it is, the more that a native speaker might have trouble pronouncing it, and we might get several different pronunciations just because we're not used to hearing it as much. Eddie, I ask because in my native language, the misuse of comma can lead to catastrophic misunderstanding. Death, not jail. Death, not jail. Yeah. See, in English, I mean, maybe in the context of a larger sentence, it could work. Off the top of my head, like we would never put the comma after not. Like, well, I mean, it depends on if there's like a whole clause there. Like I think not, but blah blah blah. Then yeah, you could put a comma. Um, in this little piece, it seems kind of weird. But if you're trying to say like death instead of jail versus oh, so yeah, I see what you're doing. Death, not jail. Death, not jail. Yeah. It seems so weird to me because death not comma jail as its own little isolated piece just seems so very very strange. But as part of a larger sentence, it could work. So that's just throwing me off. But yeah, I mean the same thing in English. Obviously, it's not going to work exactly the same way. And I know in Spanish, like I'm horrible with Spanish punctuation. Like I can spell really well, and I'm really good at remembering where like the accent mark goes and stuff. But when it comes to pronunciation, I have no idea. I basically use English, or did I say pronunciation? Punctuation. When it comes to punctuation, I'm horrible, and I tend to just use English punctuation. And my Spanish partner from uh, several years ago would she wasn't too happy about that because she was like, "What is this?" Like, it actually caused misunderstandings because I was using English punctuation. But writing, of course, is its own separate skill. It does affect the flow of how we sound, but it's not that there's a comma and so we have to sound a certain way. It's because we sound a certain way. If you were to write it, it would be represented with a comma or with a hyphen or whatever it is in that particular written case. Um, so it's how we sort of visually show like the rhythm and the pauses and things like that. I use that very freely a lot in poetry, to the point where a lot of English teachers would probably hate me, but I use punctuation the way I want in my poetry. Doppelganger. The word pero from Spanish, this R is the same pronunciation as flap T. They have some words with the R more trilled. So TR, not THR. THR is thrilled, which means you're very excited about something. Trilled is what we're talking about here with the multiple tapping. But one of the R's are just one flap, one touch. It's similar to flap teasing. Doppelganger, that is how I make the flap T. It works for me. The Spanish R in the middle of a word is exactly the same sound. Yeah, exactly. So as our resident Spanish speakers are saying, now I would say that it's not exactly the same sound. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I'm not a Spanish speaker. And I can't perfectly trill my R's either, but I can tap it. I can say pero, 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 pero. But I probably do it in like sort of like an English way, maybe. If I say like perro, 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 it's kind of harder for me to do on command. But it's very commonly for languages that have this like single tap R. It depends on the language, but it is a very, very similar sound. Yes. And it may even be exactly the same, but I think it's just extremely similar. I don't think it's 100% the same. But yeah, so and I think I mentioned that in the when I was talking about the flapped T, flap D in the main lesson for those. So not exactly it, only how I make it. Here, right, yeah. So yeah, see now that you're kind of paying attention, you're like, oh, yeah. So it's just tiny, tiny difference. If you use like if you speak Spanish and you use that like single tap R where you're supposed to do a flap D or flap T, which is the same sound, um, you're going to sound extremely good, extremely good. Now, with certain combinations, if you try to use that tap R and then pull into an English R, like water, better, you might still have some difficulty because of the English R and how you have to adjust the tap. Like you might not be used to say you might just be used to going like this instead of like tapping and pulling. I don't know. So some combinations you might have difficulty with, but for the basic sound, you will sound extremely good. It may not be 100% perfect, but it's going to be 98, 99%. And it's sort of an easy hack for languages that use the single tap R. Even Japanese speakers, which they have to be careful because they don't usually hear the difference between L and R. And sometimes when they do their R sound, it's actually an L sound. But when they do more of a tapped R, like instead of roku, if they say roku, roku, that's also very similar. And so even the Japanese R can be used as an approximation to the flap D. Your explanation about what we do when we pronounce better than the tip of the tongue does not touch the upper teeth, and it is the sides of the tongue that do that. Okay, good. Yeah. Perfect. So yeah, very nice. Okay, so that was productive. So thank you for that feedback there. What else? If we have any other questions, we can talk about that. Since Eddie is here, I don't know if you want to talk a bit about the a versus a versus a, because I was sort of thinking about how we can sort of go over that. I pointed you in the direction of the minimal pair lessons, but I don't have a triplet lesson yet for all three of them together. And so I think if you listen to me here live, do sort of a comparison as I shift between them, it's going to help to start open your ears a bit. Okay. Um, so let's focus on the basic sounds themselves first, and then we'll kind of put them into words. So we have, I'm going to start with ah, which is the front one, right? So ah, ah, uh, ah, ah, okay? And I'm just gonna kind of shift. I'm gonna keep my voice going, and you're gonna hear, right, the end points when I hit those points. So just right, and I'm gonna just go in different random order, right? Ah, ah, okay. So that I mean, you might not, and if you don't hear a difference between one of those, that is okay. But that might give you some help. Are you hearing the difference between the three when I do that? Because that should be pretty clear. I mean, it's like you hear the transition even. Um, Sometimes we have to go really, really like bare bones basic. Okay, so you are hearing the difference. That's good. Um, this is a technique that you can use. Actually, you can play with it like this yourself as well. But especially for training your ears, getting somebody to do this for you. I can even maybe make some lessons in this type of style to help with ear training. But um, when you hold the sound, it helps to amplify those different endpoints, right? And you can actually do that in your own mouth a bit. I wouldn't worry too much about doing it yourself because, like, as you start to find the right sound, then it could be a good exercise. Um, but this is what I would call the triangle, right? Because it's like ah, ah, um, where one thing that some other teachers even talk about, I didn't realize that it was a thing. I thought I created it, but apparently not. It's called the elevator, and it's for the first four sounds, right? Where you go e, and you can kind of hear those endpoints. Um, so if we're doing the triangle, now I'm going to do it without holding my voice. Okay, ah, 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 uh, uh, ah, ah, uh, ah, ah, uh, ah, ah. Okay. So do you hear a clear difference between all three sounds in that case? Because if not, it's still okay. That's normal. But especially with the preparation of the solid connected sounds, that should help you start to hear the difference with the isolated sounds, right? So let me know for sure if you're having any trouble with that. Um, if you are, that's fine. Meadow says some teachers say that flap D, as Josh named it, is the same R in Arabic, and it is absolutely not. If it were, I would not be bothering Josh with my questions. Yeah. um, yeah, I don't really know anything about Arabic, so I can't say. It's completely outside of my realm of knowledge, but I'll take your word for that. Apparently, it's not like the Arabic R. Good. Some of us Brazilians, Brazilians, some of us Brazilian speakers of English tend to pronounce the unvoiced th sort of like an F sometimes. Is it hard for American toddlers, for example, to master it? Yeah, the th sound is another sound that can be difficult. Um, I don't know the exact details on when that sound gets mastered, but I think it's one of the later sounds, and it does tend to get replaced with an F. So instead of saying think, I think. I think so. At least in normal speech, says my connection is unstable. Okay, I think we're back. My computer has been dropping my Wi-Fi recently, and so I'm really hoping that doesn't happen. If it does, we'll have to restart, but okay. This is my lovely water bottle with times throughout the day that I don't actually use. I just put water in it. Anyway, okay, so Eddie, yes, I hear them. Now I try to make it. Yeah, exactly right. So you get input, you try output. You get input, you try output. And actually, I'm going to be posting a special lesson very soon. I was working on that all morning because Sedent, who you guys might know from the chat here, he speaks Hindi, and he challenged me to try to say a Hindi sentence like a native. And of course, I'm not actually studying Hindi. I'm not putting a whole lot of effort into it, but I did record myself trying to shadow and using some of the different techniques that I use to try to get the sentence, sounding pretty good. And I even talked to him directly and got some direct feedback. There he is, Seaton. And so I'm going to be making that a whole video so that you guys can see a bit about what I do with shadowing and how I sort of like listen and I repeat, or different ways that I use the audio material as I try to adjust, to find the sound and this and that and blah blah blah. Yeah, we're talking about Hindi. Actually, we're talking about English, but so that's a lesson that is going to be coming up very very soon. Very special lesson. And I'm trying to find a way to keep it interesting, because the original footage of me recording myself and then meeting with Sedent this morning was like an hour and 20 minutes, and I've managed to cut it down to like 25 minutes. So yeah, hopefully it's not boring for you guys, but throughout the video I'm trying to like highlight certain different things that I'm doing and different tips and things to keep in mind and blah 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 blah. But yeah, so that's coming. But you got to play with it, right? You always have to play with it. Ears and then sound. Hear it, try to produce it, make little changes. And this is where you ideally need to work with somebody to get some feedback. But first is to be able to hear the difference, right? So Eddie, trying to make it can help reinforce your ears, especially as you try to make little changes and get closer. But definitely the ears come first. So if we put those into Meadow says, I hear the difference between the three vowels clearly. Very nice. Good job, Meadow. I'm not surprised, Meadow, because your pronunciation is already quite good. So what was I saying? Completely lost my thought. There it goes. Yeah. I have no idea. Who am I? Why am I here now? Yeah, so we're talking about the sounds. Oh yeah, let's put these into words. So we did the solid sort of triangle moving around those three sounds, and then we did the isolated ones. Now let's put them into words, okay? And I'm still going to indicate, right? So you can still look, you can still see. You're focused on the sound, but use the little pointers to say, okay, it's supposed to be this sound. Is that what I'm hearing? So if we say, let's do cap, because those are the ones you gave: cap, cop, cup. So I think it was cap, cop, cup. Anyway, cap, cop, cup, cup, cop, cup, cop, cap, cap, cup, cop, cup, cap. Okay. So do you hear a difference there? Eddie in particular, but anybody else, you can chime in. Let me know if you have any difficulty with that. Meadow also says, is the TH sound the same C in European Spanish? No. Absolutely not. Absolutely 100%, 1,000% no. So the C that is not a k, because sometimes the C in Spanish is a k, um, and the Z in European Spanish um, are a th sound. It's basically a voiceless th. Well, it is a voiceless th, and as far as I can tell, it may be slightly different, but I don't really notice much difference. I was never focused too much on that accent, so it just sounds like a th to me. Um, okay, wait, hold on. So your question, see, okay, hold on. I have to rearrange my thoughts here. Is the th sound? So you're saying is the th sound in English? Yes, that would make sense. For some reason, I did not understand that. That's obviously what you mean. Yeah, so it might be the same. It sounds the same to me. So yes, forget what I said before. I was thinking of I don't know. I had a weird thing there. I knew you were talking about English, but for some reason I was thinking about Latin American Spanish because that becomes an S sound, and I was just like, no, it's not the same. And anyway, I don't know where my brain was for that. Um, Clearly, I need to eat more food or something. It actually is probably the lack of caffeine because I seem very energetic, but I quit caffeine on Monday, and the first 2 days were just like I was a zombie. And now I'm at a point where it's like I kind of have more energy, but my thoughts are still sometimes kind of It's like not there. So I think I'm having a little difficulty because usually I'll have like a bunch of caffeine during the live stream, and I haven't had any caffeine. So if I misunderstand something, that's probably why. But yes, so is the th sound the same as the z or the C that's not a k sound in European Spanish? I would say basically yes. Basically. Um, yeah, the unvoiced th. Yes, the unvoiced th. That's a good clarification, doppelganger. Yeah, the voiced th obviously is going to have voice, where the in European Spanish they don't have a voiced th. They just have a voiceless th. So they say like corazón, um, but they wouldn't say corazón. They don't have the voiced version. In fact, it's really funny because I've worked with a number of Spaniards, and when we talk about the th sound, right, they can do the voiceless th pretty easily. They say, okay, think, whatever. They want to kind of do it more as like a t sound for some reason, but they can, say, okay, yeah, it's like the th because they already have it in the Castilian accent. But then when they go to do a voiced th, they can't. Like it's really hard for them. I'm like, just go in the same position that you just did for the voiceless th, but add your voice. And they're like, the like it doesn't come out. And they get it. It's just it's a strange thing because their brain is like subconsciously there's never supposed to be voice with that, and so they never have to combine the voice with that position. And it creates this little mess. So but of course they do pick up the voice th a lot faster than say someone from Latin America, because in Latin American Spanish they don't have a th at all. um, but anyway, in Spanish we don't stick out the tongue in our mouth. Yes, okay, good point, Eddie. So in English neither do we, unless we are speaking very clearly and or exaggerating. So you'll probably notice that I was saying like right? I'm kind of putting my tongue through my teeth. um, and the notice I just said the it's not actually through the teeth, right? Um, so interesting. I'm confused now. The comments are confusing me. But yeah, so if we're really, really speaking like super, super clear, like that, or I think so, then we might put it actually through the teeth. Or if we're really exaggerating, like that's a good idea, we might do that. But normally, it's either going to be a dental T or D, which is a variation of the TH sound in American English that is perfectly normal and that I've talked about many times before. Or if we do an actual TH sound, it's actually usually going to be right behind the teeth, and you might kind of see the sides of the tongue kind of peek through here. But I'm not actually pushing my tongue. All right, it's like I think so, think so. So it's not actually pushing through. That's in normal speech. But the nice clear sound, we might push the tongue out. Is definitely not required for the sound. See, so I'm confused, Eddie, because you said in Spanish we don't stick out the tongue, but then you say TH sounds in Spanish don't exist. I'm so confused because you just said don't stick out. Oh, because okay, in your first comment, you're saying that you don't stick out the tongue at all for any sound. I was thinking it was for the TH because we're talking about the TH. So the TH sounds do exist in Spanish, but in Castilian Spanish, just not in Latin American Spanish. Sedent, when we say three in a fully enunciated way, and during the transition from TH to R, is there a short schwa type sound there? No, there's not. So number one, there shouldn't be a schwa sound at all. If anything, like, okay, you're not supposed to do this, but if you were to say it slowly, like just go through the word, you say like three. You're definitely not going to get a schwa. You're just going to get a really long vowel. So it's not three. That, if you put a schwa between, that is an intentionally manipulated way to say it that is not normal. Okay, we could do that. I could say, and a one, and a two, and a three, or a three. I could do something like that. I can play with the sounds of the language, but it's not the normal way that we say the word, even if we say it really clearly. Okay, the nice, clear, enunciated way would be three, three, three. Okay, you go straight from that TH into that R. In unvoiced TH, you mean? Oh yeah, okay, I already talked about that. Or the voiced. Yeah, okay, Meadow, using shadowing with Hindi is very smart because that puts you in our shoes and shows us how to do it. Yeah, exactly. When Seedon challenged me to do that, I was just like, oh, this is a good opportunity. Because I was thinking of trying to make a video like that, but I didn't really know like what to use or what to do, and I kind of just didn't get around to it. And then Seedon's like, here, say this sentence. And I was like, okay. And as Stephen will tell you, I did not. I didn't sit there and play with it all the time. I didn't study Hindi. I played with it a bit. You know, I spent maybe a total of an hour over the course of a couple days, like maybe hour and a half at the most, playing with these things. And I got pretty close. Not 100%, not perfectly natural. The goal was to sound perfectly natural, just like a native. I didn't quite reach that goal. But given the amount of work that I did, and given the fact that I'm not actually studying Hindi right now, I think it's pretty good. So you guys can see the process and the results of that in that upcoming lesson. So, but it doesn't have to. That doesn't particularly put me in your shoes because I've already been in your shoes for other languages, and I'm taking my experience from those other languages, primarily Spanish, but also I've played with pronunciation of other languages, and I'm taking the techniques that I use and or that I've learned about, and I'm helping you guys know what you can do as well. So I'm already in your shoes. Already in your shoes. I was in your shoes before you were in your shoes, maybe. Then again, I guess you probably have been learning English longer than I've been learning any language. So that's probably true. Anyway, doesn't matter. The explanation of the TH sound gave me back years of life. Oh, thank you so much. Well, that's good. Good to hear. Very good to hear. Fantastic. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to help correct misunderstandings, to help guide you guys in the right direction, answer questions that you've always had that nobody else seems to be able to answer for some reason, but I can. I don't know why. I just have a magical way of explaining things, which doesn't work for everybody. Some people just get confused by how I explain things, but that's normal. Um, so very glad to hear that. Let's see, doppelganger, a bit of a bit of a mistake of mine. Yeah, so there's actually gonna be lots of ofs here. A bit of a mistake of mine of past teachers. Now, this actually is not correct because that you're saying it's a mistake, it's your mistake, and it's the past teacher's mistake. So the of and of actually don't work in this case. Um, so I don't know if it's your mistake or their mistake. I guess maybe let's see. Well, let me read the rest of it. Pronouncing th sound always clear, emphasize. I can't imagine how weird it was for other people to hear me say that and this. Yeah, exactly. And Meadow, you said about my pronunciation. I'm not surprised your pronunciation is what I did not catch it because I had to make effort to make it clear, so I emphasized it by consequence. It sounds very formal. We would just probably say I ended up emphasizing it. I ended up emphasizing it. Um, much more natural sounding, and then it's not informal just because it's a phrasal verb. Most phrasal verbs are not informal; they're just part of how we speak. Um, sounds interesting. So in natural speech, you hardly put your tongue below your upper teeth in the th. Yeah. So one thing I want to touch on here. So there's a couple good points here because yeah, I pointed that out to Meadow when I heard him pronounce "thank you," um, or a couple other words that had the th. He was saying it like "thank you, thank you." He's like pushing out way too much air, um, and especially because a lot of teachers tell you, "Oh, you want to be nice and clear and enunciated and this and that." It can really cause problems. This is one reason why I say, like, yes, you should be able to clearly enunciate and say things, perfectly or whatever, but that's not the way we normally speak. Enunciation is a tool. It is not the way you should normally speak. If you want to sound natural, if you're cool just being very understood but not sounding completely natural, then you can just clearly enunciate everything you say. You don't have to worry about linking rules. You can just say, I think this is the best idea that I have ever had. You'll be very clearly understood, no problem. But if you want to sound natural, you don't want to be always enunciating. Enunciation is a tool in American English, not the normal way of speech. Um, so Doppelganger is absolutely correct. He says, I can't imagine how weird he or she, I think he, but Doppelganger doesn't tell me if you're a male or female. So I can't imagine how weird it was for other people to hear me saying that, this. So it'd probably be like that, this, right? Where you're really pushing out. Um, and you don't want to do that. Okay. Um, now down to what Meadow's saying. Yeah, I was in your shoes before you were in your shoes. Yeah, exactly. Meadow was saying, so he says, so in natural speech, you hardly put your tongue below your upper teeth. Yes and no. And I talked about this in the main lesson for the TH sound. So you can go and learn more there. But if you're doing a nice clear TH, not the dental T or D variation, you're doing a nice clear TH. So if it's super clear and enunciated, there's a range to this sound. Okay, there's a range to it. So there's the super clear enunciated where we put the tongue between the teeth. So if this is my top teeth, bottom teeth, we put it here, right? Or again, only for special cases, drastic emphasis or really clear enunciation. Or sometimes we might happen to stick it out that much, but very unlikely because in fast speech, we don't want to take the time to actually stick the tongue out. Okay, so that's one end of the range. The other end of the range is actually sort of back here where we're just close enough to our hair. Okay, it's like it's not underneath. It's not like it's like like you're actually just inside. right here. And you don't want to touch. That's a common problem. That'll give you more of that like dental sound, like which is okay. But if you want a nice clear th, you don't quite want to touch it. You want to be right behind it, and you can go a little bit farther back to make it very weak. And we tend to do that usually. Actually, I just did it right now. We tend to do that instead of that. So the sound is still barely there, right? That. But we tend to do that more, I think, with going to the like other, because we have to pull back into that R. And so we try to just get as close, like as far as we can while still making the basic sound. And we'll pull into the R. So there's a bit of a range of the exact placement, but it's around here, right? The around the bottom of these top two teeth here. And then, of course, you have the dental variation where you're just laying it flat. This, that, which you could kind of stick your tongue out there too. This, that, we'll do that as well. So it has the same sort of kind of range, but it doesn't go as far back. As long as you're flat, you can do the dental version. So I wouldn't describe it as putting it like below the upper teeth, because it's actually going to be kind of right behind the upper teeth most of the time, but it's in that area. Yeah. Anyway, you missed my question. I missed your question. What did I? The one about 3? Because that's the only question I have, and I answered that question. So I guess I'll answer that again. It's the one about, it's one about 3, unless it's a different one that maybe for some reason isn't showing up here. In which case you can tell me. But yeah, so for 3, what I was saying is, if anything, you're going to go from a th to an It's going to be like, if you try to elongate it, it's going to be like a long vowel. 3, 3, 3. If you try to put a schwa between it, that is an intentional manipulation of the word that is not normal. It's possible, but it's not normal. So I can say like 3. It's a way to say it, but it's not the common, normal, everyday speech way to say it. So there should not be a schwa there under normal circumstances. It's just straight to So I hope you got that time, Steven. Unless it was a different question that is not showing up in the chat. Doppelganger, my mistake. Their mistake too, because I see. Back to what I was saying with of and of. Their mistake too, because they said I always had to say it clear and very well with my tongue. Sticker. So a tongue sticker would be a picture of a tongue that you can stick onto something, like a wall or a refrigerator or something like that. Actually, on a refrigerator would be a magnet probably, but with my tongue stuck out. See, phrasal verb again. My tongue stuck out or sticking out too much. Yes, and exactly. This is, again, one of the reasons why I'm here, because I think some of the details, I think there are plenty of great teachers out there. But I think some of the ways that things are just generally taught, and or some of the details that they tell you, like, oh, you always have to do you have to stick it out, say it nice and clearly. Like most English teachers, and they don't tell you this necessarily. I mean, it's kind of implied, I think, but I don't think they directly tell you that, like, hey, I'm not going to teach you how to speak naturally. I'm going to teach you how to speak clearly. Because then you might just not listen to them, and you'd be like, well, I want to learn how to speak naturally. But communication, right, being clearly understood is the primary goal, right? Regardless of whatever your goal is, if you want to sound natural, if you just want to be understood, obviously the first primary goal is to be clearly understood. And that should be your first aim, right? Instead of trying to sound native overnight, obviously you can work towards that if that's your goal. But you first need to, as you get closer to making the sounds properly, using the rhythm properly, you're going to be more clearly understood. And there is a full, clear way to enunciate the sounds. But that doesn't always match the common fast speech, everyday way that we use these sounds, and that the way that they come out and the way that we actually place them. So part of my job is to tell you the reality of how American English speakers actually speak, instead of just, oh, you should always clearly enunciate, because you shouldn't always clearly enunciate. In fact, at some point, I'm going to make a lesson called something like why you shouldn't clearly enunciate in English. If you want to sound natural. Anyway, if you want to sound natural. At the end of the day, it's always your choice, right? If you want to always stick your tongue through your teeth for the TH sound, do it. Have fun. That's your choice. It's not a big deal. You'll sound great, I'm sure, as long as you're not pushing too much air through it or whatever. But if you want to sound natural and be able to do things maybe a little more easily the way natives do, then I'm trying to give you guys that information. So, okay. Yeah, Meadow. I was in your shoes before. Yeah, I already read that. Sedent, yes. Thanks. Okay, good. Eddie has a message retracted. That's okay. Meadow. Enunciation is a tool, not the normal way of speech. Josh. Yes, exactly. Which you used parenthesis brackets, which is not the way we quote in English. That is not a quotation device. We use quotation marks. So it would be blah, 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 blah. And then we usually will put a dash before the person who said the name of the person who said the thing. So a little bit more punctuation today. But anyway, yeah, so interesting. We're talking about a lot of interesting things today. TH sound, the flap D, a little bit of vowels. I hope I didn't miss any comments. I don't think I did. Do we have any other questions? Yeah, I think we're all good here. Any other questions, comments? We're at almost 2 hours already, guys. 2 hours. Time just flies when we're having fun. And I know that whistle's annoying. I don't know if you guys hear that through the mic. This is like a horrible design for a bottle, because there's like the part where you drink, and then there's like this little air hole here. And it's supposed to be to where like you don't get like the water like bubble 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 as you're trying to drink it or whatever, but it just makes it whistle, and it's super annoying. It's like a horrible bottle design. But anyway. And today we have a lot of fun here. Yes, exactly. Good. I'm glad to hear that. Yes, exactly. Or or as I like to read it, because before I realized that that's how you say haha and like how you write haha in Spanish, I always read it as ja 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 ja. I was like, ja ja, what is ja 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 ja? Yeah. Elme is back. Welcome back. Yeah, I haven't heard from you in a while. Good to know. While you were gone, we got a lot more Portuguese speakers. So we have a whole gang of Brazilian Portuguese speakers here. So introduce yourself. But yeah, good to see you, Elmi. Rodrigo, do you voice search on Google? If so, do you ever have to enunciate your search term, because otherwise the algorithm will not understand you correctly? Good question. Yeah, so I do not voice search on Google, number one, because I don't use Google. It's a horrible privacy breaking tracking thing, which of course here I am on YouTube, which is owned by Google, and so I mean I guess I can't complain too much. But I use DuckDuckGo for my searches because it is privacy based. But regardless, the question is really, can the AI understand me as a native speaker? And I don't have a lot of experience with that, but my roommate uses voice search all the time. And pretty much like almost, I don't want to say almost every time, but like at least half the time that I see him do that, he has to repeat it. he has to like slow down. He has to like say it more clearly. Um, so he'd be like, I don't know, like, what's the best restaurant in town? It's like, I didn't understand you. It's like, what's the best restaurant in town? And he has to really slow down like that and say it like super, super clearly. And sometimes he even has to do it a third time, even slower and more clearly. Um, so if you're trying to practice your English with, like the Google search or something, and it's not understanding you, it's not entirely your fault. um, and of course, it could also be if your microphone is, weak for whatever reason. I mean, maybe it's not hearing you, but yeah, the AI is. I mean, I think it works a lot of the time, but it's definitely not up to a human standard for sure. Um, yeah. Yes, you are correct. I'm correct about what I don't remember what I was talking about. Probably the ja ja ja. I don't know. Meadow, you put your tongue almost behind your upper teeth. Wait, your teeth, your what? Too many years. Yeah, your upper teeth when you pronounce th normally. Especially, we need an e there. There's especially and specially are two completely different words. We might tend to, I don't want to say tend, we might sometimes drop the in especially because it's usually just a little schwa sound anyway. And it might sound like specially, but in writing, it should not be, you need the e there in front. Two different words, just so you know. Anyway, okay, you put your tongue almost behind your upper teeth when you pronounce th normally, especially in words like other and together. I always felt that, but nobody has ever mentioned that. Yeah, I don't know why people don't tell you these things. I assume that you're taught, certain things, and then you mention things like that, and I'm like, how are you teaching the th sound? I guess the easy way to teach it is to tell you to put it between your teeth, because then they don't have to worry about saying, oh, it's just a little bit behind. It's like, well, and then you have to play with it, and you have to get feedback from the teacher, and um, so I guess it's just a lot easier to teach the clear enunciated way. Maybe that's why they don't mention that. Which, by the way, the exact placement of the th, the not the between the teeth, but just a nice good th sound that's inside the mouth. It can actually be placed. So if this is the top of your mouth here, and this is these teeth, uh-huh, it can be placed anywhere in here. It doesn't matter. It could be all the way up here. Doesn't matter as long as it's close enough to the those teeth, and that gives you some flexibility with sounds that you're maybe coming from or going into. I wouldn't worry too much about that, but just know that it doesn't have to be exactly right there, like behind here. Um, that's another reason why I say it's not under; it's actually behind. Yeah. Now it could be a little bit under because again, the full range kind of sticks out, and that's the clearly like super enunciated or exaggerated way. And so having it be a little bit under is okay, but we actually usually have it inside, just behind the teeth. Um, and it could really land anywhere in that whole range. But anyway, so that was really useful and amazing. Good, very glad I could help. COVID-19 plus Brazil, not a cool combination. Yeah, from what I hear, I haven't been following it too closely because I don't even follow my own news too closely here. But yeah, I've heard that it's not all that great. Um, so I imagine you've been going through some stuff and been busy trying to maybe not go crazy. I don't know. So yeah, hang in there. Anybody who's in Brazil, of course, stay safe, all that. But yeah, yeah. Anyway, what to do, Rodrigo, or sometimes the algorithm substitutes my search term for a homophone or something. Yeah, it'll hear a similar word, and you're like, no, that's not what I said. It's really funny when it hears like a completely different word, and you're like, I didn't even say that. But I never thought that lol meant laugh out loud. I thought, when I was in the T there, typo, thought it was like an emoji, but yeah, in letter form, basically. Right hand, head, and left hand. Oh, I see. Yeah. like ha ha ha, ha. Kind of like when someone typed lol to me, I thought they were being oh, I thought they were being assaulted. Or were in fear of some kind. Yeah, okay, so instead of haha, it's like hands up, like, oh my god, I'm in danger, save me. Interesting. Yeah, because it can look like that, right? And we do like little smileys and all that stuff, but yeah, this is definitely letter based. um, so it's laugh out loud. That's like to me, LOL is like the original. Um, what do we even call that? Like internet reduction slang, or I know there's a term for it. I can't think of it right now, but like LOL, LMAO, BRB, all those things. I think LOL, at least in my mind, was like the original. I remember using that back in what was I? It was in ninth grade, eighth grade, ninth grade. Yeah, somewhere around there. So that was a while ago. We're in 2021 now. And now the whole world is using these acronyms because I know in other languages, like when you're chatting on the internet, you just put like LOL or whatever it is. Um, so it's interesting. YJ, hello YJ. I remember you from a previous chat. I think seems familiar. But welcome to the chat. I had a client today. His name was Stefan, and I didn't know the pronunciation was Steven. Yeah, notice I just said Stefan. This is actually something that bugs me. um, Now, a person's name is a person's name. Regardless of how it's spelled, if they say it's pronounced this way, okay, fine, it's pronounced that way. But to me, if you're gonna have the name Stephen, it should be spelled with a V because that's a V sound. Stephen, Stephen. If you're going to be named Stefan, which is a name, it's not that Stephen is always pronounced Stephen. There are people who have that spelling and pronounce it Stefan, like Graham Stephan YouTube channel. And so to me, it always bugs me that some people have their name spelled PH but pronounce it V. And again, it's their name, whatever. It is what it is, but it bugs me because it's Stefan. The PH represents an F sound, right? But again, this is just another case of why English is not phonetic, right? We don't have a phonetic spelling system. So if I see PH, I will say Stefan. I will say Stefan. I don't care. That's just what I say. And if I know their name is Steven, then I'll say Steven because that's how they like to be addressed. But if I see it spelled that way, I will pronounce it Stefan because that's the best way that I know how to pronounce it with that spelling. Anyway, Rodrigo. So it's actually a controversial point in English, I think. But Rodrigo, like that video where you analyze Elsa, you have to be really careful with the pronunciation of every word. Yeah. So talking about the Google search voice recognition, and then Elsa. I think obviously Elsa is highly optimized to pick stuff up, and it's probably better than the Google AI, at least right now. But again, my biggest problem with Elsa is like I think it's generally it's a fantastic app. If you want to sound clear, and that's your only goal. You don't care about sounding like really natural and exactly like a native. Then Elsa is going to take you very, very far. It will. And I don't know who watched the entire video, but I think towards the end of that uh, um, review of Elsa, I did mention that if you just want to sound clear, Elsa is going to take you very far. But if you want to sound natural, if you want to sound native like or potentially even native, which is a lot of work, but if that's your ultimate goal, then Elsa is not currently able to do that. Maybe in the future the AI will be better, but if me as a native speaker trying several times to say extremely clearly as I could certain details that it was saying were wrong, I mean, obviously the AI isn't perfect. So I can't recommend it for what it's claiming to be able to do. Um, and of course, people disagree with me, and that's fine. Um, but yeah, me too. Yeah. I assume that's back regarding the Steph and Steven thing, but um, anyway, yeah. So that's what it is. But yeah, if I disagree with something, um, my phone is gonna die. I have a comment. I plug in my phone. If I don't agree with something, I'm not going to just recommend it and say, "Oh yeah, it's pretty good. It'll help you a lot." It's like, well, depending on what your goal is. um, so, and then there are people who say that Elsa helps them a lot and this and that, whatever, and I'm sure it did. Um, but personally, I would like to hear some of these people and judge them with my ear because they may not be quite at the point where they think they are, but who knows? I could be wrong. I could be completely wrong. Faku, it's time to leave. No problem. Muchísimas gracias por venir y adiós. Yeah. See you next time, hopefully. If not, I'll see you around. Whatever. So good. Meadow, you asked me to remind you about the factors that affect the period in which you can get it. Oh, yeah, that's right. That was the other thing. I knew there was something else, which you can get a near like native accent or improved pronunciation and accent in general. Yeah, so the question was related to like how long it will take you to develop a native or near native accent. And unfortunately, there's no easy straight answer to that because it depends on a lot of factors. One factor, of course, is where are you right now, right? Because Meadow, I heard Meadow recently, and out of 10, if 10 is native, I put him at about like 7.5 or so, somewhere around there. And that's very, very good. That's a very good starting point. Going from there up to 10, obviously it's still a lot of work, but that's going to be, a shorter time period than going from say 3 to 10, where you still have, you're it's hard to understand you, you're not speaking clearly, this and that, whatever. So the first thing I would say is it's really useful to put up sort of smaller goals along the way where it's like, okay, first, you want to be able to maybe clearly hear and produce the difference between the vowel sounds because that's a big thing. Okay, and that's part of maybe a larger goal of being clearly understood, maybe not native and completely natural, but clearly understood. And that's your first big milestone. Can I be clearly understood? Right. Once you reach that, and people say, "Oh yeah, I can understand you clearly," it's not really maybe here or there, but it's usually not a problem. Then you'll probably still have an accent, right? So your next big goal is to say, okay, reduce my accent to the point where maybe people can tell that I have an accent, but they don't know where, right? Like they can't identify it. So that's another big goal, right? Which Meadow, based on your accent, I didn't really know. Maybe I'm just not familiar with your native language and hearing people who speak your native language in English, but I wasn't able to identify exactly where you're from. So that's a good thing, right? And then after that, you say, okay, my accent is small enough to where people don't know where I'm from. They just know I'm not native, right? And some people will stop there because that's already a huge accomplishment in itself. But if you want to keep pushing forward, right, get your accent smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller to where people. Your next big goal would be like to fool a native for say 30 seconds, right? Before little details start creeping in and they start noticing something, right? So can you fool a native for 30 seconds? And then can you fool a native for a minute? Can you fool a native for, 10 minutes or just have a full conversation and nobody would know, right? That's your ultimate end goal. But you put up these sort of milestone goalposts. And I think that's an important starting point to have here. But aside from that, there's how much time you're spending. You don't want to burn yourself out, right? You can overdo it. There's more intensive activities and there's less intensive activities. And if you're doing, obviously, you want to be doing a mix. Less intensive activities would be like, say, you're working on the sound. You can do that throughout the day. Like as you know, you're walking somewhere, you're doing the dishes, you can be playing with it, like or trying to make little adjustments. Say like, okay, her, cure, learn, were, in words or just the sound itself. Trying to make little changes and um, trying to just play with it, get used to feeling your tongue. Right? There's so many different factors, and again, it depends where you are. Because if you can't even feel your tongue yet, well, that's a good place to start. To really bring in more awareness so that you can actually feel these little changes that you're making. Um, so, but if you're doing more sit down intensive activities where you're like really listening to a segment over and over again, you're trying to match it like perfectly, you're breaking it down, you're doing all this work. It's a lot of work on the brain. And that can make you very tired, right? So there's the less intensive activities that you should be doing kind of throughout the day, just playing with the sounds, whatever. There's the more intensive activities that you shouldn't be sitting for hours and hours doing these intensive activities because you're going to burn out, right? You're just not going to have the energy. So you want to have sort of a sit down time, where you do those type of activities, the shadowing, like direct shadowing type stuff. And again, there's more than one way to do it. Like Professor Argelis likes to shadow while he's walking back and forth, instead of like sitting down and, whatever. So there's no perfect right answer here, but there are intensive activities and less intensive activities. And you want to mix them up. But if you're not playing with the sounds throughout the day, you're just doing this sort of sit down intensive work. It's actually going to take you longer because you need to be playing with the sounds, right? So if you kind of want to make it a habit, you might forget at first, but if you're just like so super busy and you're just like, oh yeah, I don't have time to play with the sounds and this and that, that's going to hurt you in the long run, right? You're not going to improve as fast, or potentially it might actually put a limit on how far you can get if you're not really playing with the sounds, you know, as much as possible, more or less. You don't have to do it constantly, but um, you should be doing it regularly throughout the day. Um, then there's talent is a factor. In my mind, which I know a lot of people disagree with me, talent does not set it. Okay, talent doesn't set a regular limit. I'll put it that way. It doesn't tell you how far you can go necessarily. Um, if say you want to be the next Mozart, right? You want to like really push the genre, or the next Jimi Hendrix, let's say in music. This is a good easy example where you're like, breaking the bounds and charting new territory. Then yes, talent is probably required, and the average person probably can't get to that point. But that's not what we're talking about. We're just talking about being able to sound like a native speaker of another language. You already sound like a native speaker of your language. Now you're just trying to do it in another language. And it is a lot of work again, but if you have talent, that process will be faster. That process will be relatively easier. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy or fast, but it's going to be relatively faster, relatively easier. So that's another factor. If you don't have that talent, it's going to take you longer, right? Maybe even take you more work. So these are things that you have to keep in mind, that you have to be aware of. I never thought I had a talent, but of course I always had really low self-esteem and self-confidence. And I was actually tested at one point by the military for my ability to learn languages, and I scored very well. It wasn't about pronunciation specifically, but so apparently I do have some linguistic talent, which helps me. And it definitely helped me in my attempt to master that Hindi sentence, even though I didn't quite get there because I'm not actually trying to, learn Hindi right now. But I gave it a good effort. Um, so talent or no talent is a factor for speed for sure, and how much work you might have to put in. What else did I say? Let me bring up that message. I'm just rambling here. Yeah. Um, Okay, also depends on what techniques you're using and how you're using them. That's a whole different conversation. Like shadowing, there's even within shadowing, there's different ways to do shadowing. I think one of the best ways to learn um, relatively the fastest and easiest. It's very intensive. It's a very intensive approach, but that's what I call the slow to fast shadowing, um, which I've talked about before. So there's even within certain techniques like shadowing, there's different ways that you can use those techniques to maybe learn a little faster, maybe learn slower. But you do need a certain level of intensity if you want to learn faster. That's one of the keys to fast learning is you need a certain level of intensity, um, but not to the point where you burn yourself out. See, that's the balance. How often? Yeah, okay, I mentioned that. How often you're playing with the sounds and all that stuff. Um, how much time you're giving to consciously noticing small details. So if you go through most of your day, obviously if you live in a country that doesn't speak English and you have to use your native language, okay, fine. Um, but you need to be even more conscious of making sure that you're listening to English regularly, that you're trying to notice, not just trying to understand the words, but trying to notice these little details of like, oh, I didn't realize that this is actually reduced. Because maybe you learned the word like, in one way, like enough, but it's usually pronounced enough. That E is usually reduced to or maybe I, and it's super small. Maybe you never noticed that because you learned how to read it first and how it was pronounced, enough. Um, and then you start noticing, oh, natives actually say enough usually, right? Enough, enough, enough. So that's just one small example, but the rhythm, the sounds, right? You need to be paying very close attention to what you're hearing, making sure that you have lots of time listening to it. Um, and you can do that again while you're doing the dishes. Maybe you don't have to focus on the dishes. So instead of playing with the sounds, maybe you're like listening to a podcast and you're really trying to understand or not understand the words, but try to listen to the exact sounds and the exact rhythm and the things they're doing. And then also you can record your own speech, whether shadowing or not, um, which is optional. And you can maybe even use Audacity to compare like the original audio to yours, and you can see the sound waves. Right, that's a little more technical. Some people do that. Edausen Ness does that. I don't know how much, but I've seen him talk about that on YouTube. And a couple of my students have used that technique, and it has helped them a lot, especially if their language is syllable timed. It really helps them to kind of see the peaks of the stress timing, and how the flow works visually. Um, so if you're using Audacity, if you're not using Audacity, I'm not saying if you use Audacity you're going to learn faster, but depending on you as an individual and depending on the other things you're doing, that may be, and depending on your native language, that may be something that can potentially help you learn faster. You know, but you want to be paying attention to your own speech as well, right? Are you actually producing the sounds you think you're producing, or are you just producing what your ears have always heard, and maybe your ears haven't completely been opened to the language yet? Um, Obviously, factors like sleep, right? We know that for learning anything, very general advice: make sure you get enough sleep, make sure you eat enough. But especially if you're going to be doing intensive pronunciation work, intensive shadowing type stuff, it takes a lot of energy from your brain, a lot of energy, and more than you would expect. And so you need to make sure that when you're doing before you do your intensive activities, ideally you want to be rested, you want to be focused, right? Don't have your phone going off, right? Maybe put your phone on silent or whatever it is. We know all these general productivity things. We live in 2021, so um, but that's also important, right? When you're doing the less intensive activities like playing with the sounds, you're just kind of doing that throughout the day. You need a certain level of focus, but it's not an intensive sit down study session, right? So there's lots of factors. I've worked with lots of students where just little individual quirks of that particular student, with like maybe they're having difficulty finding a particular sound, not because of their language, because I've worked with other students of that same language, and they were able to find the sound, not easily, but I could guide them. And then this person is having just a lot of trouble, right? So some people just have extra trouble with certain sounds. It's normal. Um, So yeah, and I'm sure you can probably even think of other things. So I don't want to make it sound like it's a big thing, but just know that how long is it going to take you is a question of many, many, many factors. And I wouldn't worry about all of those factors and trying to say, like, oh, well, because of this, it's going to take me this long. Just set a goal. Say, okay, I want to get my pronunciation to X level. Say I want to be, like say I want to fix my flap D. So meadow, right? You're trying to make a good, nice flap D sound. You're working on that. Say, okay, in the next month, 2 months, whatever your goal is, um, could be a week, whatever, whatever you think is a good time frame. Say, okay, I'm going to put in the time to focus on this detail or these details and try to get it to this point, right? It could be a bigger goal. Like I'm going to try to reduce my accent to the point where people don't know where I'm from, you know, or whatever it is. And you say I'm going to do that in 2 months, right? And you sit down, you use the techniques, you do the things. And if you don't reach your goal, this is where a lot of people mess up. They fail, right? If you don't reach your goal, technically you failed your goal, but that doesn't matter. Okay. It gives you something to focus on, to something to work on, a time frame for you to work within. And if you don't reach it, keep going. Keep going. Now, take it seriously, of course, but one of the biggest mistakes you can do is say, I didn't reach my goal, so I'm a failure and I might as well give up because there's no point in that. So you try as best as you can, and then maybe you can switch your focus. Maybe you switch to the rhythm or something after that, or switch to a different sound and come back to that sound later. But by setting up these mini goals and medium term goals with very specific timelines and endpoints of what you want to achieve, if you just focus on that and just keep going and focus on the 80-20 rule, where it's like, okay, what are my biggest problems that are going to give me the most benefit? Get those first, then get the next 80-20, next 80-20, and you're going to make really good progress in a relatively short time. Where Meadow is at about, say, a 7 out of 10 or so, potentially he could reach sort of a native like pronunciation in 4 to 6 weeks. Like maybe, depends. But in less than a year, I would say for sure, unless he's just doing everything wrong. But and of course, your experience is also a factor. So, like me, I've looked at the pronunciation of a lot of languages. I like playing with sounds. I know how to feel my tongue. Right? I know how to sort of map what I hear to my mouth and all this stuff. So I have that experience, and so it's a lot easier for me to start picking up the pronunciation of a language. Where if this is your first foreign language, you don't even know how your own language feels, right, in your mouth. Um, it's going to take maybe a little bit longer to get used to that. So um, learning to feel your tongue in your own language, like taking time to say, oh yeah, we say it this way, like comer, whatever it is. That's going to help you build up an awareness for how your tongue is in English and be able to make little changes and stuff. So lots of techniques, lots of things you can do. I'm going to be talking more about all those stuff later. All that stuff later. But yeah, it's complicated. So I hope that helps. I know it's very vague, but I hope that helps. Okay, Rodrigo, Thomas, and Thailand are exceptions. Oh yeah, Thailand also. Seaton was asking about that earlier because he thought the th in Thomas was a th sound, like Thomas. But no, yeah, it's the th in Thomas and the th in Thailand are t sounds. Um, Very important point. Usually the th spelling will represent a th sound. Usually, whether it's voiced or voiceless, that depends. But there are some exceptions where, like Thomas in Thailand, there might be a couple other, but yeah, those are notable exceptions. Doppelganger, that's my biggest and most audacious goal in life, to keep up the conversation in English and no one questioning where I'm from. I don't have a problem with that, but it would be awesome for someone to end up saying, "Are you really not from here? Are you kidding me?" I know, right? that's something that Edaus and Ness works toward, and he gave an account where he was in Germany and he fooled somebody who's just having this conversation. They're like, "Oh, so what part of Germany are you from?" And he's like, "Perfect." So I like to shoot in that direction too. I don't necessarily care if I can fool a native. Like obviously that would be great, but it's quite a lot of work to really bump it up. Like you can get really really good where it's like you're near native. You sound extremely well, but it's just a little bit off. And then to get that last little bit of sounding perfectly native, um, that's where like the really small, minute details come in, and it can be difficult depending. Um, so if I don't sound 100% native, it's like okay, whatever. I tried, I tried to push it up there. But if I can just sound really good, where people are like, "Wow, you speak really, really well," then I'm okay with that. But of course, I do try to get as close as I can because I like the sounds. I would like to be able to fool a native if possible, but it's not the end of the world. Um, I tried to use that thing that you told about to turn up the speed of a video. Oh yeah, or somehow, and it worked for me. I was having difficulty understanding some things. I did that, and obviously, I started understanding less. But before few hours, so within a few hours, I started understanding more. And after I turned down the speed to the normal, I could understand uh, way too more. I could understand a whole lot more, a whole lot more. Yeah. Way too is used with something that's excessive. So like it would be way too much, meaning that you understood more than you wanted to, which maybe that's what you wanted to say, but anyway, if I say a whole lot more, whole lot more. But anyway, good, good. Yeah, so it works. It works. That's what I said. Because your brain has to compensate, and then when you slow it back down, oh, I can hear things. So very nice. Anything else? We're at about 2.5 hours. It's only been a half hour. Wow. Seemed like the first 2 hours went so fast. Now the last half hour is like super slow. um, yeah. Trying to think of anything else here. Hmm. I don't know. Nobody has any questions. I can't think of anything. So, it's also getting hot in here. It's 4 o'clock. All right. Well, I think we might end the stream today here. It's a shorter one, only 2.5 hours. But that's okay because I do have some other things that I could get around to doing today. Yeah, get around to doing. That's a phrasal verb that's fun. Do that. Anyway. All right. So nobody's asked any questions, so I'm gonna go. Thank you guys very much for coming and hanging out and asking questions. I hope I was able to help. And it's fine for me. I have to work on the sounds. Yes, on those sounds. I know in and on is horrible in English. We work on something because you're putting your focus and attention onto it. Like it's like a surface. You're looking at it, sort of looking at. I know it's horrible, but focus on it, work on it. Okay. Um, Which word do you use when someone changes the main subject? Translated from my language, it would be something like running from the main subject. Which word do you use? Someone changes. So you mean like the subject of conversation? Um, you're welcome, Eddie. Changing the. We use say you're changing the topic. So to change the topic. Um, unless you're talking about grammatical subject, in which case I'm not completely sure. I'm pretty sure you mean like the subject as in the topic of conversation. When you change the topic, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, that's literally say to change the topic. And there's other things you could say like um, to evade the point, maybe, or to evade the topic, maybe. So evade, avoid. You're avoiding the topic. Um, yeah, so it's similar idea. Running away from, running from. We wouldn't say it that way in English, but we could say things that are kind of similar. Yeah. Um, the subject of the conversation. Yeah, exactly. When they change the main subject. Now that also depends on exactly what we're saying because like you can go on a tangent, which means I'm talking about this, I'm talking about this, I'm talking about this, and then that reminds me of this, and so I start talking about this, but that's not the main point, but I'm over here now, so that's a tangent, and we you go on a tangent. So um, that is different than changing the topic because I'm not intentionally changing the topic to something else. I'm going out. This made me think of something else, and so I started talking about that. And I'll probably eventually come back to the main topic where I left off. Um, but that also falls within your question because they're changing the subject. It's just in a different way. So it might depend on exactly what you're talking about or what you're trying to say. Um, but yeah, change the topic is probably the general way. Um, is there a sense behind the word? So meaning, is there meaning? Meaning and sense are quite closely related, but they're not interchangeable. So is there a meaning behind the word startlingly? Startlingly, I guess. Startlingly. It doesn't make any sense to mean what it means. Yeah, I don't know why I read that startlingly. Startlingly. Yeah, so many corrections. Yeah, no problem, doppelganger. Um, let's see. So startlingly, this is a compound. Well, not a compound. It's you want to break it down. This is where lexical grammar or word families come in really very useful because we know the ly ending creates an adverb. Right? This gets a little bit grammary, but in a good way. Um, you don't want to go and memorize a whole bunch of rules necessarily about what's what here, but ly is probably the most common way to make something into an adverb, particularly to make an adjective into an adverb. So we know startling is an adjective being turned into an adverb. Okay, so you to understand it, you can take away the ly. You say, okay, let's not look at it as an adverb. Let's look at it as an adjective. Startling. Hmm. Okay, now we have start and then this weird ing thing, right? So the ing is the adjective. In this case, ing is an adjective. We're describing something that is startling, right? And then start is the core here. I don't know why we say the L. It's, uh, but oh, I do actually. Yeah, that's why. Because there's a verb to startle. To startle. Okay. Now, if you don't know this and you see something like startlingly, you're going to be like, what the heck is that? But if you know startlingly is the adverb of startling and startling is the adjective form of to startle, okay, Now, startle, I don't know, probably historically it's related to start, but to startle basically means to scare in a very small way. So I don't know, like you come around the corner and I didn't expect you, and you kind of scare me a little because I didn't expect somebody to come around the corner. Oh, it's like a little shock, a little surprise, right? To startle someone. So start, it's kind of tied to the idea of start. It's like my fear, my shock got started a little bit. It's like a little jump start, a little shock, right? And then it went back down because I realized, oh, it's not a problem, right? And it wasn't enough to scare me a lot. It just kind of started to scare me a little bit. So it's to startle. It's a weird word, but I think that's why the word exists. It's related to start. Um, so now that you know that, okay, don't think of it as start necessarily, but to startle, to cause a small shock or fear, surprise, whatever. Okay. And then startling, so something that causes that. So you could say, I don't know, it was startling to see what happened. Maybe something happened that kind of shocked you. Oh, it was startling to see that. Okay. Or alternatively, you could say, seeing that startled me, past tense, right? So two ways to say the same thing. Startlingly would be an adverb. So you say, okay, it's startlingly, I don't know, ugly. So it's so ugly that it actually shocks you a little bit. Startlingly ugly. Like, oh, wow, what is that? Right? Or maybe startlingly beautiful, right? Like, wow, it's so beautiful. It's kind of almost like, wow, it shocks me a little bit. Um, so see, when you break it down like that, it should make a lot more sense. Yeah. Um, so anyway, that's a whole other area of English that I haven't particularly touched too much yet, but I will. Um, if you want to learn more about that, it could be useful to look to do some research on like word families. You're going to find a lot of technical, dry, boring stuff, but you'll probably find some interesting details here and there. When I teach it, I'm going to try to make it not so dry and boring. So there are a lot of gems and diamonds in what you said. It was very helpful. You are the best man that helped me. You mentioned many things that I would try to do. Perfect. I do not feel my tongue in general, even in Arabic. Yeah, so do not leave us. It takes time to see our messages, I think so. Oh, okay, I see. So there's just maybe a delay in the connection. Okay. So, well, I'm here still, so here we go. Um, yeah, it might be my internet actually. But blah, 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 blah. Yeah, so seriously, like people don't realize, right? It's like, okay, yeah, I want to learn the pronunciation. I want to be understood. Okay, so I say cat, and they try to make the sounds. It's like, okay, I mean, that's fine. But if you really, even if you just want to be better understood, right? You don't necessarily want to master exactly the sound, but you just want to do it pretty well. It helps so much if you can feel your tongue. And by default, most people can't feel their tongue. I mean, obviously, you can literally, like, if I bite my tongue, I can feel it. But I'm talking about the little muscle sensitivities of, like, oh, I feel a little shift in the middle, or I feel a little tenseness back here, or things like that, because you don't need that awareness to communicate. And it's so subconscious and natural that, like, you already figured all that stuff out when you were a baby. And you didn't have to consciously remember how it feels in order to produce the language. And so it's just like moving my hand. It's like I don't if I go to grab something, I'm not consciously aware of feeling my hand and my arm. It just happens, right? um where if, say, you're going to learn how to play tennis, okay, obviously you have to hold the racket, but it's not just enough to hold the racket, right? There's the exact way. Like, you might want to have a little bit of an angle, and you might want to have a certain looseness instead of like a super firm grip, right? And there's these little subtle details that you need to kind of feel in your hand, maybe even in your wrist. Keep your wrist loose, right? In order to more effectively and easily play tennis, right? Where most people, they're just like, okay, I'm going to grab the racket, I'm going to hit the ball. That's what it looks like on the surface, but that's not really what it is. And it's the same with language, right? Whatever skill you're learning, um, if you can go and you can build the more subtle sensitivity and awareness for what's actually happening with your muscles, whether that's in your hands or your tongue or whatever, it's going to help you a lot. Okay. Because, like, let's say if I'm trying to, like, in the Hindi sentence, so one of the sounds was ah, which I'm probably still not doing perfectly, but it was like ah. Like, wait, hold on. Kya, kya, like kya, kya tumaram. And it's, I looked on the vowel chart for Hindi, and it's the A, like the unmerged ah sound, unmerged ah, or not ah, but the one that's up here instead of where in the merged cot merger it's back here ah, it's the one that's unmerged up here. Um, except the exact position in English is a little farther forward, and the Hindi one is like back here. And so, because I know what the merger feels like, because I know what the Spanish ah feels like, and because now I'm a bit more aware of what the unmerged ah feels like, I knew sort of how to adjust to make this little change. And maybe I didn't completely nail it perfectly, but I could get it sounding really, really good because I have these reference points and I know how my tongue feels in those different positions, right? So even if it's just in your own language, if you say, oh, yeah, my tongue feels like this when I'm speaking my language, and this person is telling me I just need to maybe go up a little bit, or I need to maybe tighten it a little bit, or I need to, do whatever change. And so you move in that direction, try to say it, preferably get some feedback from somebody immediately, but that's not always possible. And that's how you play with it, right? But if you can't feel your tongue, it's so much harder to do, right? Because you literally can't even feel what you're doing with your tongue. Um, and that is something, that's a skill. That's not a talent. That's a skill because I developed that unintentionally through my trying to get Spanish pronunciation. I wasn't consciously thinking of that. I was just playing. I do see. Part of my talent, I guess, is I have a natural tendency to play with sounds because I like the sounds of languages. And so I naturally was playing with sounds and doing little things with my tongue. And so I wasn't trying to feel my tongue, but I built up a reference because I would also compare English to Spanish. I would say like, oh, 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 and try to feel the differences in the lips and the tongue and all that. And so by comparing English and Spanish, and by trying to tweak little things in Spanish, that built up my sensitivity of my tongue. Um, and that also helps me teach you guys because some of the things I teach you, like with doing the bowl shape for the schwa, like if you try to say and it doesn't work, but I say, okay, try to push down here, lift this up a little bit, you're gonna get a nice good schwa sound, right? It's gonna be a very good schwa sound, and that helps a lot of people, right? But if you can't feel your tongue and you don't understand what I mean when I say push the sound down here, then it can be a lot harder to do because you're really not sure what to do with your tongue. So but still, it gives me ideas like that to help kind of, give you different ways to approach the sounds that will maybe work better than the ways you've been trying. Um, is an SNL sketch? Oh, and I can't read today. In an SNL sketch, a reporter felt uncomfortable with what her guest said, and if I remember correctly, she said, "Let's pivot." Would that be another way of saying let's move on to another topic? Yes, but that's not a common way to do it. You won't hear that very often. Let's pivot. It probably because, and who knows, maybe there's some sort of pun going on there that maybe you didn't pick up. I don't know, based on the context of the sketch, but most likely because the sketch is set up as like there's a reporter. Pivot in this type of case, like, oh, we're going to pivot to another point, that can sound a little more formal. And news reporting tends to use more of the passive voice, maybe a little bit more formal language. So that might be why. But it's definitely not the normal way that we would say that. So, um, Murozaki. Hypnosis is a very powerful tool to change habits and do difficult things. You can even control the temperature of your body. It helps with many things. You think we can do it to improve our accent? Oh, very good, interesting. Well, you don't need to. God, I'm going to sound so weird here, and I might lose some people. um, Whole different topic. You don't need to hypnotize yourself to control your body temperature. We don't have to go into that, but yeah, you're absolutely correct. Hypnosis is very powerful to change things. So do I think that hypnosis can help you improve your accent? Possibly, but that also, like, I don't want to say that's dangerous necessarily, but in terms of ending up with the exact accent that you want, you're introducing an element of something that could go very wrong. Um, I don't know, it's weird because I don't really know too much about hypnosis. I know enough about it that it does seem to be an actual thing, even though a lot of people still think it's nonsense, because it's kind of a weird thing. I suppose maybe if you were put into a hypnotic state and then you were given instructions like me, like saying, okay, do this with your tongue, do that with your tongue, and or you were told to, like, say it was like an American English speaker, okay, listen very closely to exactly how the speaker is speaking on this tape and, reproduce it. Like, I don't know if that would magically work. um, but maybe with the right type of suggestion or direction, and of course some audio input so that your brain knows what it's supposed to be uh, doing with the pronunciation. Theoretically, I guess it could help. It's not something that I would. I mean, if you're curious, you want to experiment. I mean, go ahead. I guess for science, but if it's not something that I would explore. Not necessarily because I would be worried about it, but just because, like, I don't really see much of a point, especially for me, because like half the fun is in trying to get the sounds. um, some of the sounds are just horrible, like the trilled R. um, that's just no fun. But aside from that, maybe I could use hypnosis to get a trilled R. That might work. But yeah, I don't know. It's kind of weird to me. Um, yeah, I wouldn't recommend it, but I don't really have much to say about it. I don't know. Sorry, I'm late. I was watching Attack on Titan. Of course you would. Um, did they come out with another episode? Because I thought it says it's completed on the site that I go to on episode 16, but clearly, like, that's not the end. So I don't know what's going on with Attack on Titan because it doesn't seem like it's the end of it, but apparently, I guess there's no more episodes. I don't know. I'm confused. Um, but yeah, anyway, good. Well, welcome to the chat, Dark L. And then I'll be seeing you Sunday for our Portuguese rhythm comparison. Rodrigo, the sketch I mentioned is on YouTube SNL film screening at 3:09. YouTube. Let's see. Um, Something. Okay, SNL. You paste. SNL film screening at 3:09. 3:09. Okay, then about 3. I see. Yes. So in an interview situation like that, uh, pivot, meaning change the topic or let's change the question or whatever it is. is I think, a fairly common term in that context. So in that specific context, yes, that would be a way to say like, let's change the topic or let's move on to another topic. Yeah, that'd be perfectly fine. Because I was thinking, because you said like a reporter, so I was thinking like there's like like the news thing and they're reporting in front of the camera, but this is more like an interview where they're interviewing somebody. Um, and so yeah, pivot is a word that would be used in that type of context. Um, they wouldn't necessarily use it because usually they don't say that out loud, right? Like if they need to change, they'll just change whatever it is. But it would be pivoting to another point, another question, whatever. Do you think all prepositions are phrasal verbs? Wait, I cannot read today. All prepositions in phrasal verbs, not are phrasal verbs. This doesn't make any sense. Do you think all prepositions in phrasal verbs have a logic, or some ones are too hard to think of the meaning, so it's kind of like they don't have a logic? Good question. And some ones do. So you're welcome, Rodrigo. The only reason why phrasal verbs exist in the first place is because there's a logic. Now, again, they don't. It doesn't necessarily have to be a logic where you use a logical approach, but there's a feeling. Okay, there's definitely a feeling, and that feeling can be approached in a logical way that can help you build up that feeling that a native has. So that's the only reason why the phrasal verbs exist in the first place. Okay, if that didn't exist, the phrasal verbs wouldn't exist. Now, that being said, um, I have encountered some phrasal verbs. I can't think of off the top of my head, but I have encountered some phrasal verbs where it's kind of a stretch where I really like not a stretch in a way like, you're really trying to stretch that, but it's a stretch as in like the core of the logic is here, and this particular use would be like way out here. Like it's still in the area, it's still attached, but it's like it's very loose. It's really hard to see the connection. But I have not found an exception. I've never found an exception to the core logic that I've identified for each of the 17 prepositions that I looked at. Um, some people will say in some cases maybe you're really just trying to stretch it, and it does you're making it up to fit your core idea, and I would disagree with that. But the point is, again, even if it's not, um, even if it's hard to see, or it seems like it's really out there, um, there is still that underlying feeling in in pretty much all cases. It's just sometimes it's really hard to explain how it ties back to that feeling. Um, so those are cases that seem kind of like, well, maybe they're exceptions or whatever. And if there are exceptions, I don't think that's the end of the world. I haven't actually found any. I've been able to successfully explain all of them. Although now, if you ask me random questions, I might not be able to answer because I'm really out of practice of thinking about the logic of prepositions. Where back before I was like seeing all these connections and stuff, and it was a lot easier to find those connections. So some of the ones even I have trouble with. But as long as you build up that core feeling, then when you find those cases that seem like they're exceptions, they're going to be a bit easier to understand, to remember, even if they seem like really, really weird, like, that's a strange case. And if it is an exception, you can memorize it, you know. So it's not the end of the world. As long as at the end of the day, even if I'm wrong that there are no exceptions, um, most uses of a particular preposition will fit a core feeling, even if there's maybe slightly different. Um, well, I'm thinking of four. I'm going to put that to the side. That doesn't matter. Some of them are a little complicated, but there's sort of a core feeling for each of them, and most of the uses of a preposition will fit, with phrasal verb or not, will fit into that core feeling. And even if you just get that, that's still going to help you so much compared to not having that. And then the exceptions, you can just memorize the exceptions, but I don't think there are any. Is there any difference between make up, make out, and hook up? We have the sexy questions today, apparently. Um, there is a very large difference. Um, now, there may be more than one meaning for some of these. Like make out can actually just mean like how did you do? Like say how did you make out on the test? Like what was your result on the test? That's a completely different meaning of make out. So of course there are multiple meanings for some phrasal verbs, but make up is when you not to put makeup on, or to put on makeup. This we're talking about makeup as a phrasal verb. So to make up is where like say there's a couple, they have a fight, and then when they sort of say, "Oh, I'm sorry," or this, they sort of come back together and heal that fight or whatever afterwards. That's to make up. Or you can make up for something. It's a very similar meaning, not necessarily with a couple, but like you did something bad and you want to help make it even. Like you want to do something good to help fix that bad that you did. So you want to do something to make up for the bad thing that you did. Um, so that would be make up. Make out in this type of context that we're looking at is basically like just kissing a lot, like that type of thing. Yeah. Um, Usually for an extended period of time. So something teenagers often do. And then hookup. Go to the dictionary. um, Hookup is a sexual relationship with, we say, no strings attached. So there's not actually a relationship. There's just by default, one time, could be more than one time, but there's just the physical relationship. Um, so quite different. Yes, these are all quite different. Um, okay, Wendell, thank you for joining us today. If someone tells me to tell the bus driver to drop, meaning leave him at the gas station, if I tell him I'm stopping there too, I will stop there too. Okay, I see. Are both tenses correct in this situation? Okay. I'm stopping there too. Stop there. Well, if you say I will and you don't contract I and will, it's actually going to sound pretty unnatural here. You could say it with a contracted I'll stop there too, but we probably wouldn't use I. We probably wouldn't use will in this case. It would be fine, is possible. Um, I'm stopping there too. Would be very very natural. Um, or probably actually I'm getting off. Get off is I mean stop is perfectly fine, but get off is probably more common. Um, yeah, we probably use that continuous tense. Or you can maybe say like I'm going to get off there too, using the going to do. That would also work really well here. I'll stop there too. Yeah, the will it works, but it's just sounds a little bit off. Um, why is very difficult to describe. So this is a good case where like between will and going to, although will does work, um, this is a case where there's actually a subtle difference between them, and one sounds better. I don't know. I get will sounds a little too static, like it was already well. See, I can't because that doesn't make sense. See, it sucks when the way that you're going to explain something, like you're thinking of it one way, but the words that you would have to use to explain that make it sound like another way. And I know that's confusing, but uh, that happens. Okay, whatever. Doesn't matter. Yeah, I would just use the ing form. Um, it's not the end. Well, I assume that's for the live stream. Uh, Doppelganger. Last question. Sorry, it took me a second. Last question. Running away. And then you have another question. You said this was your last question. um, okay, so running away from the main topic, English. How do you call people that live in a small town? Oh, I see. So changing the topic, or we would probably say changing the topic, not running away from the topic. Um, how do you call people that live in a small town where everybody knows each other and what happens around? So what's the name for the like a person or a group of people that live in that type of setup? I mean, small town boy, small town girl, usually. Yeah, just like in Journey, right? Just a small town girl. Um, I mean, we don't call them like small towners or something. So yeah, small town, or I guess you could say small town people if it's plural, because you're talking about a group. That works, I guess. But there might be something else that we say, and it's not quite coming to my brain at the moment. I have a feeling there is, and it's probably so obvious. It's like, yeah, duh. Why didn't I think of that? But that's my answer. And maybe they have their own typical and local things. Well, we also have locals, but that doesn't have to be a small town. I mean, if somebody lives in the area, they're a local. So, um, okay, Meadow is feeling your tongue is knowing its positions. Okay, so is feeling your tongue knowing? No, we don't need the is again. Um, yeah, so is feeling your tongue knowing its positions, and should we know the structure of our mouth or the mouth to do that? Yeah, you don't need to know the structure of my mouth. um, Good question. So this is where the vowel charts come in. You don't have to use a vowel chart, and again, the points on the vowel chart aren't necessarily pinpoint accurate, but it's like, okay, this is the center of gravity of the sound. It's in this area. So uh, the vowel charts can give you a good visual for what's going on in your mouth, and to give you an idea of kind of like what part of your tongue you should be using for certain sounds and how open, how closed a particular sound might be. It doesn't give you all the information. It doesn't tell you how tense your tongue should be. It doesn't tell you anything about the lips. It's really just like front of the tongue, middle of the tongue, back of the tongue, and then relatively maybe how open or closed your jaw is. Um, so that gives you a lot of good information. Um, you don't need that to feel your tongue. All you need to do to feel your tongue is to pay attention to how your tongue is moving when you speak any language. It doesn't matter. It could be your native language, it could be a foreign language that you're learning. Um, And especially if you're trying to improve your exact sound or placement of a particular sound in a foreign language, this is when you make those little micro adjustment changes where you just try to change this little thing, whatever, the tenseness, the exact height, maybe the exact sort of shape of the tongue. Um, and the more that you can feel your tongue, the better you can do that. Well, by trying to do that, you're going to help to start learning how to feel your tongue. But one of the best things you can do is to try to notice how your tongue is naturally flowing in your own language. Most of the time, you're not going to be able to pay attention to that because you're talking to somebody, whatever. But if you try to pay attention to that, you're going to start noticing, oh, hey, yeah, my tongue just did this, my tongue just did that. And you can also sit and just say things in your language and really focus on what's happening with your tongue. What part of your tongue are you using? How is your tongue flowing through your mouth? And the more you just try to pay attention to that, the more you're going to start to build a conscious feeling, right? So that's the easiest thing is just to start with your own language. But by using the vowel charts and trying to make little changes to improve your sound in another language, especially if you say, okay, I know in my language the sound is here, but in English the sound is maybe a little more open, right? Then you make a little change, um, and it's through that process both in your language and trying to make small changes for another language that you start building up that sensitivity and awareness of your tongue. So it's just a process. So you don't have to get so super technical detailed where like, oh, this is the alveolar ridge and this is the palate and this is the I don't know, whatever. It's completely unnecessary. I mean, that information can potentially be useful, but that's more theory, that's linguistics, that's, if you're interested in that stuff, fine, but it's absolutely unnecessary. Like there's a reason why you don't hear me use terms like alveolar ridge because some alveolar ridge potentially could be a relatively useful term compared to a lot of the other ones, but because it's a specific point. But that's why I like to try to show you guys. It's like teeth, top of the mouth. There's a bump. Tongue goes here, right? Instead of saying the alveolar ridge. It's like if you don't know what that is, okay. But if you do know what that is, well, just because I say alveolar ridge, maybe you think it's like up here, it's back here, it's over here. Like where exactly? So that doesn't help. Um, so just to make things easier and to actually try to show you, I try to show you with my hands what's going on with the tongue, and apparently that works quite well. Um, so a lot of the technical terminology, whether it's pronunciation, grammar, or general linguistics, a lot of that is unnecessary, not useful for the skill development. It can be useful for knowledge, but it's not useful for skill development. Some of it is, most of it's not. And in fact, I was talking, I think last week about my skill upside down skill pyramid that can map all skills. And I don't know if I mentioned this part last time, but I'm going to be talking more about that on my other channel. But there's the right, it's the smallest practical unit that is the foundation of the whole skill. So in spoken language, that's sound. In written language, that's physical written characters. In sign language, that's the signs that you make. In music, there's there's the notes, right? Different basis. What's the smallest practical unit? And then that organizes itself into higher and higher levels. So we get sounds to syllables to words to phrases to sentences to clauses, whatever. Okay. But there's also another pyramid underneath that, right? And this is another reason why I decided to make it an upside down pyramid, because it doesn't just emphasize that smallest practical point, but it's also the top of the other pyramid. And the other pyramid underneath the surface, right? So imagine if like an upside down pyramid and then there's the ground and it sits here on the ground, right? There's another pyramid underneath the surface that is the theory, right? All the technical stuff. So if we go sound, underneath that, we start getting into like the physics of sound waves, right? And how it hits your eardrum. And like that's not necessary for language learning, right? That's too technical, it's too scientific. It's perfectly fine knowledge. It could be interesting to you, whether it's in the domain of physics or linguistics or whatever. But that's not actually going to help you very much with actually developing the skill to be able to pronounce the language or play the instrument or whatever it is. And some of the details in this underground pyramid can be useful. Some of them can be useful, but usually they're too academic, they're too theoretical, they're too just pure knowledge, and they don't really have much application to the skill itself, right? So just like learning how to ride a bike, right? You can either sit there and study the physics of how balance works and how the bike is put together and all this stuff, and that's perfectly great knowledge. But even if knowing all that, you get on the bike, what's going to happen? You're going to fall because you don't the practical skill of being on a bike and balancing and getting that physical practice, that is completely different than the theory. The theory just tries to describe all that. If you want to develop the skill, you have to get on the bike. And that's what the upside down pyramid is all about. It takes you to the smallest unit that will give you the biggest impact for the entire skill and provides the foundational level that you can then build upon, which in the case of language, again, is pronunciation. Sound, ear training, mouth training. So anyway, blah. So obviously your tongue is your instrument. Your lips are your instrument, your throat is your instrument as well, but your tongue is a big part of it. And so if you can't feel it, that's kind of a problem. So you just got to play with things, practice things, and you will start building a feeling. Sakapet. I probably didn't say that right, and I have no idea what that means. I don't speak that language. But hello. Interesting. Okay, moving on. Doppelganger. Phrasal verbs are only used for human beings. Why can't I say wash up the dishes, for example? You can say wash up the dishes. Phrasal verbs aren't only used for human beings. I don't know who told you that. That is very glaringly, stupidly wrong. Like, I can't even believe that somebody would say that. I mean, not pointing to you. I don't know where you heard that, but whoever told you that or wherever you read that, that is not right at all. Like, because if that were true, I can say turn on the light. The light isn't a person. Like, at least I don't think it is. Oh God. Okay. Yeah, I'll get to your comment, Steve. It's asking if I want to show it or hide it. But yeah. So I don't know. I guess that's it. Point is, phrasal verbs are used for everything. It doesn't matter. You're welcome, Wendell. Meadow, I see many speech therapists and accent coaches who do some exercises and recommend them where they stick their tongues out and open their mouth weirdly. They say that doing so helps a lot with the pronunciation. What do you think about that? Blah. Yeah, your comment is so out of context now, Steve. It's like, what is he talking about? I'll go ahead and show it. It's not that bad. But yeah, so well, I mean, I guess it depends on what you're doing. If you're just doing like I don't think that's going to be all that useful. um, but that can help to physically loosen up your mouth, I suppose. I do think that there's value in doing things like that. You don't have to, and it depends on what you need work on. So, like, I mean, if like let's say you can't really get the ah sound, right? Especially if you're using the merged one back here, it's like all the way down, all the way back. And for some reason, you just can't get that. Okay, so then if I say, okay, we're going to do a special exercise, we're not going to worry about the ah sound. I just want you to open your mouth as wide as you possibly can and try to push your tongue down as far as you can. Just say ah. Okay, seems a little weird, but for that specific application where I'm having you try to focus on opening your mouth and pushing your tongue down, that can help you sort of get used to how that feels. And it's exaggerated. You don't necessarily have to do that exact position for the sound, but it helps give you a little bit more of a range because you're having a problem not opening enough in the first place, right? So in a targeted way, based on the problem, yeah, I don't see any problem with that. It can be very, very useful. Or if it's like, I don't know, what's one that because I did one like that kind of before. What was that? I don't even remember. Anyway, yeah, so there is value, but I don't think that just throwing your mouth around, or whatever is necessarily useful in itself. Related to that, though, there are drama warm-ups. That's what I call them, because I was in drama in high school, and these are things to kind of like open your mouth because when you're acting, right, you want to enunciate a bit more, especially if you're on a stage. You're not like in front of a camera because you need to project out to the audience and you need to make sure your words are coming out nice and clearly for people to hear. And so we would do some sort of like tongue twister type things where we would say like the big black bug bit the big black bear, made the big black bear bleed black blood. So obviously lots of B's there, lots of vowel sounds there. the BL sound, or we would do the awfully awful lawyer's daughter ought to be taught to draw, but we would do it in a British way, right? Where it's the British way is kind of more exaggerated than the American way, and of course we're over exaggerating it even for British standards, but we would say like the awfully awful lawyer's daughter ought to be taught to draw. And it just helps to loosen up your mouth. And if you do things like that, especially if they're kind of like tongue twisters, then that can also, I think, help a lot here, where you seem like you're using your mouth in a crazy way, but you're kind of not, because you're not, again, you're not just making weird things with your mouth, like trying to throw your tongue outside your mouth or something. Um, so, things about things. Okay, what does hit mean here? Hit that shit in the context of two guys talking about dabbing. I'm actually not completely sure. This can have a sexual connotation. I don't know if it's in this context with dabbing, but that's a common place where it's used. Or it could be drugs, like if you're smoking weed, right? Like, oh, let me hit that shit, whatever. Um, But with dabbing, I don't dab. I don't really know much about dab. I didn't even know what a dab was at first. Funny enough, I actually learned what a dab was through a video game. um, so remember, I'm sometimes out of the loop on some things, guys. I'm not the most popular hip person in the world. Um, so I suppose he's saying dab, like the hit would be, hit that shit would be saying the same as like, oh, dab, like, do a dab or whatever it is. Like, I don't know. So a little bit outside my area. Rodrigo, I find it hard to understand pronunciation lessons that are based on describing the position of the tongue. I usually rely on my ears and I try to imitate as much as I can. Maybe I should get used to them. Well, yes and no. I mean, relying on your ears, that's a fantastic thing. You're already ahead of most people. Because that's what I tell you guys to do. Um, I think a lot of the lessons that talk about describing the position of the tongue and stuff are maybe overly technical. Not that they're bad. I mean, they work for a lot of people, and it's fine. Like I've seen some of Rachel's lessons because people have asked me like, "Oh, what do you think about this?" And she has like the close up, and it's like you see it this way, you see it this way, you see how much her mouth opens, and that could all be really really useful information. Super super helpful. But sometimes it could be a little too technical, a little too, especially if they bring in terminology like alveolar ridge or whatever. So yeah, I don't know. If I mean, if you're still working on your English and you don't usually watch those types of lessons, maybe give those types of lessons a chance, and it'll give you a different way to think about it. It'll, maybe finally help you solve a problem that you're having with a particular sound or whatever it is. But yeah, if you don't like it, if they're confusing to you, if they're hard to follow, then I wouldn't worry about it. But that's again one reason why I try to show you guys with like my hands and maybe like some visuals, instead of using all these technical things, because um, it can be confusing. Even for me, like some of these technical terms are confusing to me. I'm like, what is that again? So I love you for not using the alveolar ridge. Yay, good. Well, I use it all the time. I just don't actually use the term. Ha ha. Anyway, and that is very smart from you. Smart of you. Of and from are very very close sometimes. In this case, it's actually of. Um, because you take the psychological part into consideration. Because using that jargon makes things more difficult. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't want to be a technical textbook. Like you guys can find technical information all over the internet. um, my job is to help make things understandable and easier to do. That's my goal. I don't always succeed in that goal, but a lot of people say I do. So If you want the more technical things, you can go to a different channel. You can go to, you know, different sites, different resources. There's all kinds of interesting things out there. But you know, oh, we're almost at 3.5 hours now. I'm getting really hungry. Uh, I eat more too. Anyway, anything else today? We ended up talking for an hour more than yeah, that British tongue twister that they used to do in drama classes is funny, yeah. Yeah, the awfully. Yeah, we really stress out that awfully awful. Of course, British people don't actually speak that way, but that's the whole point. It's to exaggerate it, right? To get the mouth open. So, um, I don't like it either. I think the only I would understand. I think the only thing, you missed a word there. The only thing I would understand about the mouth position is right. Mouth position. Well, oh, the sentence. I'm not sure what we're doing with the grammar here. Only I would understand about the mouth positions if she put a GoPro inside her mouth so we can have a better understanding. um, okay, the only way I would understand about the mouth positions is if she. So we have two clauses here, and you're missing a word. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it's just one or two little words that can make all the difference in understanding. Um, yeah, I know, right? But like, if we had just like a small camera, we can actually like see inside the mouth. I am going to be doing a lesson that I'm going to call the visual vowel reference, where I'm going to do something kind of similar to that, but it's just going to be one video for like all the vowel sounds. And I'm going to try to let you guys see inside my mouth as much as possible. Obviously, it's not always possible. That's one of the problems. If I say E, you can't see inside my mouth. It's not possible. So there's a limitation in that. But again, that's why I like using my hands, because I say, okay, it's kind of like up here, right? Um, you say, okay, E, and you say, okay, is farther down, right? It's kind of flat. So instead of showing you my tongue, which I also do, right? I sort of give you okay, if this is the inside of your mouth, where's your tongue? And so you can actually kind of maybe see the things that you can't see from my mouth. So I don't know. Is dropping the I and keeping the M in I am an Australian thing? Yeah, in a am. um, Interesting. So instead of saying like I am tall, they say like am tall. Uh, because that just doesn't sound like good English at all to me. um, and I don't know, because I don't know a whole lot about Australian English. It could be that you're actually hearing a very lazy diphthong, where instead of I'm, like as a contraction I'm, they're saying like I'm, and it sounds like am kind of, but it's actually a really lazy diphthong. Um, but again, I don't know. If you know more about Australian English than I do, then you'll probably know if it's actually um, if they are dropping I, but it might be a thing with the ears. Sounds like it, but it's actually not. Thanks for correcting me. It's smart of you, not from me. Yeah, no problem. I'm hungry. I'm getting tired. I need sustenance. Sustenance. Can you try to do the shortest E that you were able to do? Okay. Oh, wait. Eh. E or eh? Because you put two E's in, but then you put an H. So this is the way that I write E and the way that I write eh put together. So I'm really not sure which one you mean. So do you mean E? Eh. E is the first vowel, eh is the third vowel. I think you mean E because I was talking about E, as in meat. Yeah, so that's E, the first vowel. Well, I mean, that's seems like a weird question. I mean, I just eat, 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 eat. You just go into position, make a little sound, and then stop it. I mean, but ugh, tired. I'm hungry. I'm have to go pretty soon. Almost at 3.5 hours. 3 hours and 25 minutes. When would you do the short sound? Okay, so this is a false question or a question based on likely misunderstanding. But somebody beat you to it. Let's see here. Meadow says you mentioned that you drink caffeine. Do you think it helps with mental work from your experience? Would you recommend? Well, actually, I didn't mention that I drink caffeine. I mentioned that I quit caffeine on Monday. So actually, I don't drink caffeine now. Um, at least for the time being. I mean, I'll probably add tea in later. But anyway, the question here is, do I think that it helps with mental work? Would I recommend it? Caffeine has been proven to have many benefits. As long as you're not sensitive to it or you don't metabolize it in a weird way. So the average person, there's numerous health benefits. Um, however, so I have two answers here. There's the general answer, and then there's my specific take on the answer. The general answer would be yes, it can definitely help you focus. It can help you get things done. Um, especially if used responsibly. Like you're not constantly chugging down caffeine all day, like 6 cups of coffee. Um, but maybe you're just using it strategically. Like, okay, this is my shadowing session. I'm gonna, have some caffeine, not necessarily a whole lot, but have some caffeine to help me focus. Or people use it as a pre-workout before they go to the gym, right? Because it helps them get a little extra energy to push through the reps. Get those extra reps in or whatever it is. And it can be useful for things like that. Um, my personal perspective at this point, because I am coming off of, I guess I can't completely call it an addiction necessarily because my withdrawal has not been that bad. The first 2 days were horrible, but as of yesterday morning, I was kind of like, this is better. But like I was drinking, uh, it could be two of these a day or the equivalent, like in coffee or whatever it is. And I have to clean my desk. But one of those has like I think 160 milligrams. You're supposed to not have any more than like 400 milligrams, and I was getting at least like 350 to 400 milligrams or more a day. Um, yes, I'm going to come back to you, Steve. Don't worry. Um, the It threw me off completely. I think that although there are some benefits to caffeine, and although you could use it strategically, um, I don't really think that there's much point or purpose at the end of the day because I did some research when I like before I quit because I wanted to see if other people had experienced things. And there are some people who say like, oh, they quit caffeine for 3 months or 6 months, and they feel more energy, they feel more focused than when they were dependent on the caffeine. Because that was my problem. Like I could not get through the day without having enough caffeine. Like I would just crash. So I was completely dependent on caffeine to finish my day, and it was like one of the first things I consumed at the start of the day. And sometimes I would even drink caffeine, you know, at 7, 8 o'clock at night, which I definitely shouldn't, but I would because I still have some coffee left. I don't want to throw it out, so I drink it or whatever. Um, And so maybe you could say that's just abusive and excessive and whatever, but um, I think that it's a stimulant that does not um, like it. You don't need it, um, and I don't know. I think that the potential to abuse it, different people can handle it differently. If you think that you would end up abusing it, then I would just stay away from it completely. If you think you can handle it, like for certain study sessions here or there, just a little bit of caffeine, then I mean, yeah, it can help you. But would I recommend it? I guess I can't say. If it were me, I would probably just avoid it. That's just me. But you are a completely different person. You know, um, my opinion doesn't particularly matter here because it's an individual thing. It can be beneficial. Okay, Steve. Okay, so talking about this E. Um, when would I do the short E? So remember, I don't use the term, and I know you're not necessarily saying this, but also I might as well get to this really quick. I feel like that I only drink caffeine like once a month. Um, yeah, so it can give you like a real boost if you're not used to it. But to me, I just end up wanting it more and more and more. Um, so uh, the I don't use the term short and long for vowels because it's very misleading. It can make many English learners think that it's attached to the stress when it's not attached to the stress. Um, so I want to make that clear first because you say like you're talking about how what's the short sound, right? And I'm not saying that's what you're saying, but I just want that to be clear to everybody. There is no short E and long E. Okay. There's a stressed E and unstressed E. And of course, if it's stressed, it will increase the length of it. But in English, when we talk about the long and short vowel sounds, that's not what we're talking about. Um, now, when would you do this? So this is, I think, a very important question and points to a very fundamental misunderstanding of how English works. And I blame the way that English is usually taught. Um, so E, right? The first vowel sound E. Um, the length of that sound is going to depend on two main factors. The first factor, and this is true for any vowel sound, really any sound, but especially vowel sounds. It's going to depend on two main factors. One is the if it's stressed or not stressed, because remember it's a time stressed language. So if a syllable is not stressed, it's going to be relatively shorter. If it's stressed, it's going to be relatively longer. It doesn't necessarily mean super crazy shorter and super crazy longer, but an E particularly would probably reduce to another sound. We don't have to worry too much about that. But um, the stress or not stress nature of that syllable will determine the length to a degree. Okay, so how long the sound is. The second factor is the speed. And this is something that I think maybe isn't talked about as much, but is a very, very big, important factor of actual real speech. And it's something that I try to point to as I talk about the dynamic range and flow of American English speech. So let's say I have an unstressed, so the two opposite ends of the spectrum would be like a fast, okay, let's do a fast, so a slow unstressed E, and then a fast unstressed E, right? So just like the speed of speech, if I'm speaking like this or if I'm speaking like this, okay? But it's unstressed. So it'd probably be like slow, E, E, fast, E, 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 okay? Now if it's stressed, E, E, fast, E, 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 okay? Now, the point here isn't, oh, I think I hear a little difference. There is no difference. Okay, there might be a little tiny bit of a difference in the exact way that it comes out, but it's the same sound. It's the The speed will make the sound shorter. So if it's already unstressed, it's going to become even shorter. If it's stressed, it's going to become a little bit shorter. Okay. But that's all it is. Okay. There is no E and E. There's just the E sound. Okay. So that's very, very important. So if I say before, now the B here will usually reduce to either B or B with the second vowel or the schwa. But the fully enunciated version of the word is B, right? Before, before. Now that has to be super small, super quiet because it's unstressed. We want to hear the four, before, before. Okay. Now I could slow it down. If I'm speaking really slowly, I can say, well, before that, before that. So the four still needs to be relatively louder and longer, but you can make the B a bit louder and longer as long as the four is relatively louder and longer as well. So before that, speaking very slowly, very clearly. Okay. Or before that, actually I reduced it to a schwa. Before that, before that, before that. Okay, I'm making sure to hit that E before that. Before that. Okay. It's the same sound. It's just the speed is shortening it more. Okay. So if it's stressed, it will be a little bit longer, but the speed is the biggest factor of how long or short a particular sound might come out. So your question, when would you do this short sound like eat, eat, eat? When I'm speaking quickly. Or maybe in an unstressed syllable if I'm not speaking super quickly, just maybe kind of a little bit of a slower speed. But generally, it's a speed question. So that's all it is. The faster you speak, the shorter all the sounds get. Dark L, I drink more than 10 cups of coffee a day. I tried to quit, but it didn't last long. Yeah, I'm glad I didn't get that far. I thought I had a problem. Apparently not. Caffeine for shadowing as my new slogan. Yeah, make a t-shirt. Caffeine for shadowing. More than 10 cups of coffee a day. Jesus. How are you still alive? Because I used to have this problem. I haven't had this recently, but it's kind of part of why I wanted to quit. But before I was drinking so much caffeine that because like my heart is already, it seems like it's kind of an irregular thing. Like it's not like I have a heart problem necessarily, but it's maybe a little bit different than normal. And I noticed that if I drink like way too much caffeine, then when I lay down to go to sleep, my heart beats really weird. Um, and so the cardiologist, the heart doctor, said, oh well, lower the caffeine consumption. So I lowered the caffeine consumption, and it went away. And then I was kind of getting back up there, and I was like, I needed to get through the day. I needed to get through the day, and then of course, usually there's sugar with it, so there's the sugar component also. It's something sweet. It's not just like water. Um, and so I was just like, nope, I want to get off of this. I don't want to be dependent on it. So here we are. But those first 2 days were like, oh my God. Like I just had a constant headache. And I slept like 12 hours each night because I was just like, I can't stay awake. Can you do the same with the sound? You can do this. It's the same for all sounds in all words. See, I think the way that English is usually taught and or the way that you might perceive English coming from your language, um, just completely, it's like a foreign concept. It's like, because what I'm trying to explain from my perspective as an English learner or as an English learner, as an English speaker, is so super simple. It's just like you speak louder, or sorry, you speak faster, the sounds get shorter. You speak slower, sounds get longer. That's how sounds work in English. Of course, there's the stress, the relative length based on the stress, but it's mostly the speed. Speak faster, there's less time for each sound, so they become shorter, right? Relatively within the same stress and rhythm. But it applies for the whole language. It's the entire language, right? This is why I really hate that you're taught, oh, there's the long I and the short I. No, those are technically accurate linguistic concepts that confuse English learners, because the long I does not mean that it's a long sound, right? It's a diphthong, so I mean, relatively, it is long compared to the monophthong. That's why it's technically accurate. But to understand English rhythm and stress and length of a syllable, it completely just ruins the entire understanding of how English actually works. And I hate it so much, because it just confuses so many of you guys. So even though I can't technically accurately say there is no long I and short I, basically there is no long I and short I. Linguistically, yes, but I want you to completely ignore that concept, because I can say I really fast and short. I, I, I. I can say the short I, really slowly and long. It, I, it is. Okay. It depends on how fast I'm speaking and if that syllable is stressed or not. So, God, it bugs me so much. That's why I'm here. Yeah, so specifically with the ooh, right? If I say like you, okay, so if I was speaking really slowly, you are going. Okay, I'm emphasizing the word you. You are going. Okay, nice and long, clear sound. Or if I say, do you like it? I could reduce it to yeah, but I can also say you. Do you like it? You. Do you like it? Do you like it? Now, there's no change in the position necessarily. There might be a little tiny tweak in the position, but it's the same area. There's not really any change in the position, so don't think about that, because I know some languages there actually might be a little bit of change in the position for like the shorter or longer ones. Like for example, Hindi, I learned, has short vowels and long vowels. So there's like and and maybe it's not for that particular sound, but that's my understanding. Or there's like oo and oo, right? And those are actually two different things. In English, that doesn't exist. Okay, if I say ooh or ooh, 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 um, now you're hearing a little bit of a different sound because I'm pushing out a little bit more, the stressed one. Um, ooh, so I say ooh, 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 ooh. It's the same sound, same everything. It's just a little bit louder and longer in the second version. That's it. And that's usually based on the speed or in the stress. Okay, there's no actual use of a short ooh compared to a longer ooh. It's the same sound, same thing. It's just depends on the speed and the stress. Yeah, I feel that little chest pressure when I'm laying down too. Yeah, that's unfortunate. You should probably at least reduce your caffeine. Maybe get down to like, I don't know, 7 cups a day or something. From my perspective, not for my perspective, from my perspective, U and E are kind of special. How so? Darkel, also, I'm trying to learn lots of phrasal verbs lately. How many phrasal verbs should I learn a day? In your opinion, I'm good at memorizing them, but when it comes to using, yeah. So here we actually it's two, but it's ing when it comes to using them. I simply choke. Well, that's because there's, as I tell you guys many times, over and over again, there's a difference. I guess maybe not over and over again, but there's a difference between knowledge and skill. You can memorize every phrasal verb in the English language, and you still won't be able to use a single one, because there's a difference between knowledge and skill. One of the biggest mistakes of everybody learning any skill is to not realize that. But how many verbs should you learn in a day? Personally, I don't think that's a good way to learn phrasal verbs. of course, my way is, to use the logic and this and that. Now, if you already have the feeling for the logic, and then you're going to go and you're going to start learning a certain number of phrasal verbs a day, then that I think that becomes a little more applicable. But if you're just like learning phrasal verbs, whether using the same preposition or just random ones or whatever, I really don't think that's the best use of your time, especially because number one, many phrasal verbs have more than one meaning. So maybe you just learn the most common meaning. And number two, which is normal part of the process, but you're not going to learn all the meanings at once. And even if you do, you're not going to be able to use all the meanings at once. Um, but number two, um, again, you can build up a big database of knowledge, but if you don't practice using it, you can't use it. So what I would recommend instead is, of course, start with the logic, build up a feeling for the prepositions, because it's going to make the phrasal verbs so much easier to remember and learn and actually be able to use spontaneously because you can feel them. Um, but that aside, what I would do is you're going to use sort of a memory trick. So instead of just learning random things, you're going to pick phrasal verbs that don't use the same ending. So it's not going to be the same verb and it's not going to be the same preposition, right? So you don't want like end up, get up, whatever, blah, 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 right? But you want them to sort of be related in some way, right? So now it's okay if like, you know, say two of them use up. Okay, it's not the end of the world. But you generally want to have different verb, different preposition pairs, but related to the same thing. So say like a morning routine. Okay, so like maybe you wake up at 7 o'clock, right? You get out of bed, which I don't classify that as a phrasal verb technically, but that's okay. You get out of bed. You turn on the shower, right? Um, let's see, and you're just thinking of things like I don't know, brushing your teeth. I don't think we really have a phrasal verb. Brushing your hair. If you're a girl, obviously you can put on makeup, but um, and you try to think of, which I guess from your perspective it might be hard to do because you don't like. I'm trying to think of the phrasal verbs based off of what I know, based on that context. But if you can say like, okay, phrasal verbs used for the morning or used for breakfast or something, and you can sort of have a theme around it. It's going to make it a lot easier to remember and to be able to actually start using it because you have a real context, right? And you generally want to do that. So, and that's also going to strengthen the network of connections in your brain for those particular phrasal verbs. And that's exactly what you want to do because if you just learn, oh, here's a word or a phrasal verb, it means this. That's just floating in your brain. It's not particularly attached to anything, and that's why you can't use it because you don't have a strong network related to it. Which again, that's part of what the logic of the prepositions does is it helps you build that strong network under the surface by feeling it. So yeah. So if you were to take that type of approach, like a topic-based phrasal verb approach, I would say maybe if you were to do 5 to 10 phrasal verbs a week, maybe 15 at the most, sort of adding like five more through the week. So like you start with five, and then maybe 2 days later you add another 3 to 5 or whatever it is, um, all around the same sort of topic. And maybe you're trying to make sentences with them. You're trying to actually use them. You're not just trying to memorize their meanings, but you're actually imagining yourself in those situations. Or actually, if it's say you're making breakfast or something, and you're actually trying to like as you're doing the things, you can use some of the phrasal verbs. Um, but if you did that, then yeah, 10 to 15 a week might be a really good pace. So anyway, this is kind of strange, but I understand 100%. In Portuguese, the full "u" is what happens if I have an L after a short "u." Would that be like in legal? Because I don't think there's. I don't know if there's. I don't. Like. It seems to me like there could be an oo sound there, but I don't know if that's actually how it would be in Portuguese, or if you're talking about like. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not familiar enough, but that's an example that might come to my head, um, like legal. Anyway, by the way, what's the difference between filled and full? Good question. They're very, very similar. It really depends on what you're talking about, I think. So, like, if you eat a lot of food and you know, maybe you could eat more, but you're just like you feel your stomach. You're like, oh yeah, I'm okay. Like, I don't need more food. You say I'm full. You wouldn't say I'm filled. That sounds kind of weird. You could say I'm stuffed, which is like if you're like really full, we would say stuffed, which is also related to filled. But that's a special case. So that would be full, or I don't know if now I can fill my bottle with water, and if it's all the way up here, it's full. You might think, well, it's filled because I filled the bottle with water. And you could say that the bottle is completely filled with water. That's one way that we could say that. But we simply say the bottle is full. So in that case, there's not really much difference between the two, but we would probably use full. Um, so I think full is more about the general or abstract, like complete occupancy of a space, where filled is more kind of about like the physical, like filling, like it's filled with cream or it's filled with something like, I don't know, yogurt or chocolate, right? So there's chocolate inside of it. Um, where if you say like it's full of chocolate, that sounds like there's just a lot of chocolate in it and or on it. Like it's just there's just so much chocolate. Um, so think of filled as sort of like the physical filling, as we call it as a noun, the filling that is inside of something. It's filled with something. Um, okay, so you say this is kind of strange, but I understand 100% Portuguese. The full "oo" is what happened. Yeah, so I mean, I don't know enough about Portuguese to say for sure there, but um, I would say that in English, as I said before, um, the an "oo" that happens to be pronounced shorter versus an "oo" that happens to be pronounced longer is the same sound. There's no difference. Um, it's more about the speed and the stress. Like we don't have a reason to use a shorter version of the same sound. Um, and again, like even me just trying to talk about this, the whole like oh short and long, like short I or short I, long I. I know that's in the background, and I'm just like I feel like I have to keep reiterating that like that's technically linguistically accurate, but not how English works. um, so yeah, it's like I can't even use the word long and short without that being in the background. Um, so it's stupid. So I don't know, but Portuguese is a little bit different. Anyway, we're at almost 4 hours now. So any other questions, comments, things, slogans? Ha, yeah, I'm getting pretty tired. See, I haven't had any caffeine, so I'm still not fully adjusted. And I need to eat. So I think I'm gonna go because I need food. So I don't know if there's a delay and maybe I just haven't seen your messages yet, but I'm gonna go anyway because it is time to go. But thank you guys very much for attending the live stream, for asking your questions, for hanging out. And I will see you all hopefully next week. Bye-bye. Yes, Dark Ally will see you specifically on Sunday for the Portuguese rhythm lesson. Okay.